Hades was also cautious. He always remembered his most important duty, guarding the bronze prison deep within Tartarus, where the second-generation Titan sin gods were imprisoned. Before leaving, although he handed over his bident and helm of invisibility to Hecate for safekeeping, he still kept the key that could open the bronze prison close to him. Otherwise, Ares and Hecate would probably have already opened the bronze prison, released those sinful titans, then ascended Olympus, seized the divine thrones, and restored peace to the world. Although it was a bit regrettable that this couldn't be done, Hecate gaining regency over the underworld meant that the master and disciple had already gained an immense advantage. Within the underworld, there is no shortage of hidden places where things can be stirred up, nor is there a lack of those who harbor resentment towards the gods of Olympus. Of course, Hecate was also influenced by Ares. The one sitting in the throne room of the underworld palace wielding authority was merely a clone she created with magic. Her true body remained in her tree palace or magic workshop, attending to her own affairs. Anyway, the current divine system of the underworld is gradually improving, and the king of the underworld no longer needs to personally attend to every matter. One of Hecate's conditions for taking over authority was that she wouldn't waste too much time and energy on the king of the underworld's affairs. Hades also made it clear that she only needed to oversee the twin gods, the three judges, the ferrymen of the underworld, and others, supervising their work. Ares is also currently in the magic workshop, watching the live broadcast from the underworld palace through Hecate's true body. He saw Hecate's clone commanding the underworld nymphs to take Persephone to the special separate palace prepared for her. Inside, besides a tranquil garden and spectral maids responsible for her daily life, there was also a special surprise, personally prepared by Ares and Hecate, which they believed Persephone would be very pleased with, to the point of forgetting all else. After meeting Hecate, the current regent of the underworld, Persephone, with a mix of anticipation and trepidation, made her way to the separate palace prepared for her in the underworld. To show respect, Hecate, the current regent of the underworld, personally led a large group of lamp Hades, guiding the way and escorting Persephone to her future home. They crossed a long bridge and, near Elysium, saw a palace slightly smaller than Hades' black palace but still of considerable scale. The palace was filled with narcissus flowers, symbolizing Hades, exuding a fragrant scent. Countless spectral maids moved about, who would be responsible for serving Queen of the Underworld Persephone in the future. From Persephone's room, one could also see the beautiful scenery of Elysium through the windows. These arrangements were all very ingenious, but they weren't what delighted Persephone the most. What surprised her the most was that as she entered her room, a blonde beauty in a black and white ultra-short maid dress came before her, bowed, and addressed her as master. And this blonde beauty had a face that was very familiar and enchanting to her. She looked exactly like the goddess of wisdom on Olympus. Hecate, Persephone covered her mouth in surprise and asked, "What is this?" "This is a surprise prepared for you by Ares on behalf of Olympus, so that you can dispel your little loneliness in this cold underworld," Hecate replied. "He heard about your hobbies and personally asked the god of fire to create such a gift for you. Her body is equipped with an intelligence that is completely obedient to you, capable of meeting any needs of a qualified maid. Of course, if you don't mind, you can also use her for other things. Do you like her?" "I like her, of course I like her." Persephone walked over, took the doll's hand, and then reached out to gently caress her cheek. The doll was made of some unknown material, but it felt exactly like human skin. Persephone was somewhat enchanted. Seeing the queen of the underworld's expression, Hecate smiled slightly, instructed the surrounding underworld nymphs to take good care of the queen of the underworld, and then turned and left. Meanwhile, her true body complained to Ares. "To come up with such a disgusting idea, it's truly worthy of you, Ares." "Indeed." Ares proudly put his hands on his hips and said, "Anyway, I don't know how Athena plans to scheme against me, so I'll try my best to disgust her within my capabilities. Gods have the ability to sense their idols in their earthly temples. Since this doll used Athena's likeness, it can also be considered one of Athena's statues. This means that the goddess of wisdom can feel what Persephone does to this doll, albeit through a layer of separation. Although this won't cause Athena to violate her vow of virginity, it will certainly disgust her. Previously, a brazen individual who desecrated Artemis's statue was shot dead by her. But now, Persephone is the queen of the underworld. If she lays her hands on Athena's statue, Athena can only grit her teeth and endure it, she cannot directly eliminate Persephone. Thinking of Athena's current predicament in her temple, Ares let out a strange chuckle, but he did not slack off. Instead, he turned his attention to another important matter. Atlantis, this kingdom, ever since Sea King Poseidon broke with Zeus and returned to the sea, vowing never to ascend Olympus again, has, like the Sea King, cut off all contact with the outside world. However, through the connection between the lower-level Atlantean believers and the four mechanical angels, Ares and Hecate still managed to glean some information about Atlantis's current situation. Sea King Poseidon, after taking a divine lightning strike, as expected, vented all his wrath on his own people. Traditional art, traditional art. His oracles became increasingly harsh. First, he demanded that the royal family offer princesses, then that queens be offered to his golden palace for his pleasure. Moreover, none of these women returned safely to Atlantis after entering the golden palace. Now, he even demands that all noble women from the middle class must be offered to him to beg for his forgiveness. Ares estimated that if this continued, Atlantis, this powder keg, would explode, and then, just like its original fate, it would rebel, and then be submerged into the depths of the sea by the irresistible divine power of the main god, becoming a legend in history. Under these circumstances, the next step of Ares's mechanical god-making plan should proceed. Chapter 127, Chapter 125. Atlantis Revolt. Within the lower city of Atlantis, a ritual that was utterly blasphemous to the sea god Poseidon was secretly taking place in an alleyway. A group of commoners from the lower city of Atlantis gathered in this alleyway. They placed the best meat they could acquire onto the crude altar in the alley. However, they were not worshipping Poseidon, the creator of Atlantis, but another entity completely unheard of by the Greek gods. Great Lord of Armies Mars, please grant us your guidance. The leading commoner, draped in a white linen cloth, dressed himself to resemble the royal priests in the sea god temple. He led the group of commoners, standing before the altar and praying devoutly. The tyrannical and lawless demon Poseidon and his royal pawns have recently demanded that the nobles offer all the women in their households to appease his wrath. Such a demand will soon fall upon us, the lowest commoners. But if all the women of Atlantis are taken by him, how can we Atlanteans continue to procreate? Great Lord of Armies, please grant us revelation. The group of commoners continued to chant and pray devoutly, hoping their words would be heard by the ethereal deity. Just as they repeated their prayers for the seventh time, the leading commoner's eyes suddenly rolled back, and he fainted on the spot. His consciousness abruptly left his body, and then a terrifying vision appeared in his mind. He saw a colossal and terrifying figure rising in the distance of Atlantis. This figure, composed entirely of seawater, was immeasurably tall, and in his hand, he held a trident formed from condensed seawater. Clearly, this figure was their sea god Poseidon. After this figure appeared, 4 steel-constructed bodies swiftly flew from the horizon. These were 4 winged steel giants with blood-red eyes, riding various mechanical horses, treading through the air. These 4 steel giants came around Poseidon, immediately drew their weapons, and engaged in a fierce battle with Poseidon. Monstrous waves rose, almost reaching the sky, and countless terrifying fire clouds appeared in the sky. Meteorites fell from these fire clouds into the land and sea, scorching the entire ocean red. Amidst such terrifying upheaval, Atlantis also tottered, eventually being torn apart by these heavenly powers, crumbling into pieces. The continent sank into the ocean, and the entire nation perished. However, just as this man was frozen with fear, unable to move, by the apocalyptic scene before him, one of the four angels entangled with Poseidon in the distance suddenly flew before him. This mechanical angel was 5 meters tall, and its outstretched wings were so wide that the man could barely perceive their span. It held a scale in one hand and a long sword inscribed with runes in the other. It appeared to be Famine, one of the four archangels. After arriving before the man, it suddenly turned sideways and then pointed its long sword at a certain place on the slowly sinking Atlantis. The man's gaze followed the direction pointed by the angel's long sword and found that it was pointing to a building slowly collapsing into the ocean. The design of this building was very unique, allowing the man to recognize it at a glance. The Lower City Assembly Hall. This was almost the only place where the commoners of Atlantis could voluntarily meet the middle-class nobles. Normally, when something major happened in Atlantis, the nobles and royalty would gather the commoners here to announce the commands of the royalty or the sea god, and it was also a public building where Atlantean commoners were not prohibited from entering. As the man's gaze fell upon the Lower City Assembly Hall, the assembly hall slowly collapsed under the pressure of the sea water. However, miraculously, just as it collapsed, a golden light suddenly burst forth from its ruins. Subsequently, a massive treasure ship was born from these collapsed ruins. It rode the wind and waves amidst the tsunami and earthquake, then sailed towards the horizon. Immediately after, these visions disappeared, and the man's consciousness returned to his body. He heard anxious shouts from all around. "Noah? Noah? Are you all right?" The man opened his eyes and saw his companions, who had just been gathered and praying with him, surrounding him, looking at him with worried expressions. Seeing Noah wake up, the group also breathed a sigh of relief. Someone in the crowd said, "What happened to you? Why did you suddenly faint while praying?" "Oh, about that, listen to me, we are saved." Recalling the scene he had just witnessed, Noah scrambled up from the ground with a spring in his step. He said to his companions with great excitement, "Just now, I received a revelation from the great Lord of Armies Mars. He told us that the destruction of Atlantis is inevitable, but there is a place that can save our lives." "What?" Hearing Noah's words, the surrounding Atlantean commoners asked in surprise and excitement, "Is that true?" "Of course it's true." Noah nodded with certainty. "Go quickly and inform our companions in other areas, and tell them to gather here with us then." Several more days passed, and the royalty of Atlantis indeed summoned all the commoners of Atlantis and announced to them the oracle that the sea god Poseidon demanded they offer their wives and daughters as sacrifices to appease the sea god's wrath. As soon as this command was issued, the lower-class people of Atlantis became enraged. They had never enjoyed much of the sea god's blessings, but they had fully endured the sea god's wrath. Every time the upper class of Atlantis angered the sea god, they, the lower class, had to serve as scapegoats to allow the sea god to vent his anger. Moreover, this time, as commoners, they had no right to participate in the battle. The failure of this battle, by rights, should not have been blamed on them. But now, these nobles and royalty of Atlantis actually wanted them to offer their wives and daughters to Poseidon as playthings to appease this despicable main god. In addition, during this period, under the influence of the Spartan bards, the Poseidon demon theory had been circulating among the lower class of Atlantis. Therefore, this time, instigated by a group of Spartan poets and Atlantean Mars believers, the lower class commoners of Atlantis directly revolted. Chapter 128, Chapter 126 Latin. Initially, when the news of the rebellion by the commoners of Atlantis reached them, from Poseidon, Lord of the Sea, to the royal family and nobles of Atlantis, no one took it seriously. After all, the commoners of Atlantis had no right to participate in external wars, although the upper and middle classes of Atlantis were equally superficial. These superficial individuals at least trained in combat and possessed excellent weapons and equipment. Dealing with a group of commoners who only wielded pitchforks and hoes, and lacked armor, fighting many at once was not an issue. However, when the lower classes of Atlantis rose in rebellion, these nobles and the royal family of Atlantis realized how thoroughly mistaken they had been. These commoners of Atlantis had somehow acquired a large quantity of excellent weapons and equipment. Initially, the nobles and royal family of Atlantis could still suppress them with their superior military training, but after a period of time, these commoners of Atlantis seemed to awaken. They not only began to organize well-coordinated attacks, using their numerical advantage to force the nobles and royal family of Atlantis into continuous retreat, but also some strange individuals ran behind the noble and royal lines, starting to preach the worship of some heretical gods to them. They spoke of Lord of Armies Mars and Lord of the Surging Waves Neptune. Not only that, but they also persuaded these nobles and the royal family to think about their wives and daughters who had been taken by Poseidon. Under such a two-pronged offensive, it wasn't long before some of the royal family and nobles of Atlantis simply joined the commoners in rebellion. They attacked their colleagues from behind with the commoners, then opened the gates of the middle and upper levels, letting the commoners of Atlantis in. Subsequently, this group of royal family members and nobles who betrayed their own colleagues openly became the leaders of these Atlanteans. Instigated by some commoners who believed in the Lord of Armies, they toppled all statues of Poseidon in the city, smashed all items related to Poseidon, and even set a fire that destroyed the symbols of Poseidon's authority within Atlantis. This made Poseidon gnash his teeth in anger, so the Lord of the Sea drove his golden chariot directly to the coastline near Atlantis, preparing to unleash a tsunami to utterly destroy this nation. However, at that moment, he encountered an uninvited guest. His dear nephew, Ares, the god of war, was happily squatting on the outermost circular city wall of Atlantis, watching the chaos within the city. "Ares, what are you doing here?" Seeing his foolish nephew, Poseidon also thought of his father, so his mood worsened, and he shouted at Ares without ceremony. "Oh, it's Poseidon." Ares smiled, turned his head to look at Poseidon, then turned back, chuckling. "Is that even a question? Of course, the smell of blood here attracted me. Poseidon, it's really interesting here. There's fighting every day. After fighting Athens, you fight among yourselves. After the upper class fights, the middle class fights. After the middle class fights, the lower class fights. Then, a part of the middle and upper classes fight the upper and middle classes together with the lower class. The people here are quite spirited. I really like it here." "Humph, get lost." Poseidon drove his chariot past Ares, simultaneously warning him. "Atlantis is my city. I know, that's why I haven't intervened, right?" Ares spread his hands, showing an innocent smile, watching his victim, Poseidon, drive his chariot past him. Then, his true body in the underworld manipulated four mechanical gods, sending revelations to their believers. "Poseidon has arrived, quickly go to the lower assembly hall for refuge." So, upon receiving the revelations from the mechanical angels, those devout believers who had been fighting alongside the Atlantean army immediately turned around. They abandoned the temporarily rebellious Atlantean nobles and royal family members, taking most of their own relatives and friends from the army with them, and all went to the lower assembly hall in Atlantis. And after this group of people gradually arrived, Ares looked towards the sky. Poseidon had already driven his chariot to the very center of Atlantis. Seeing his temple being burned by a group of Atlantean royal family members and nobles, Poseidon's face was red like a monkey's backside in anger. So the Lord of the Sea no longer granted mercy to his descendants. In the clouds, he directly raised his trident and summoned the power of the sea. Under Poseidon's command, the boundless sea surrounding Atlantis slowly began to churn with waves. Initially, it was just a shallow ripple, but propelled by the wind, this ripple grew higher and higher along its path, eventually transforming into a wave taller than the highest city wall of Atlantis upon reaching the Atlantean coastline. The surging wave, like the heavy hammer of Hephaestus, the god of fire, easily smashed the outer walls of Atlantis. Boundless sea water poured into Atlantis, quickly transforming the entire city of Atlantis into a watery expanse. At the same time, the entire continent of Atlantis also began to experience violent earthquakes, continuously shaking, and the entire continental shelf began to sink. At this moment, Ares also raised his hand, pointing out a magical aura that fell into the lower assembly hall within Atlantis. Besides inciting the Atlanteans to rebel against their faith, those Spartan bards also bore another task from him, secretly helping Ares establish an escape passage within this city-state. After they disembarked, every subsequent Spartan merchant ship that came to Atlantis for business would have 1 or 2 boxes of goods secretly handed over to these poets by the Spartans. Although these bards were not as professional as the magicians who specialized in magic research in Sparta, they had also learned some magical knowledge for unforeseen circumstances. Ares ordered them to arrange these goods in the lower assembly hall of Atlantis according to his requirements every time they received a shipment. That location was where the middle and lower levels converged, usually bustling with people and a mix of all sorts, making it the most convenient place for subtle maneuvers. After several such exchanges, Ares, with the help of these bards, set up a large-scale teleportation magic array there. This magic array led to a magical ark that he and Hecate had built a long time ago and was now docked in the deep sea next to the continent of Atlantis. Rather than an ark, it was more like a submarine. In any case, this magical ark, maintained by magic, could not only sail on the sea but also travel unimpeded on land or in the depths of the ocean. After Ares activated this array, light emanated from beneath the floor of the lower assembly hall. A profound array appeared under the feet of these people, teleporting them all into the magical ark located in the deep sea. And those Spartan bards responsible for inciting them were also saved by Ares's spell, diverted to the underworld, and sent back to Sparta. And after Ares completed this series of actions, in the distance, Poseidon, lord of the sea, once again activated a wave of his kingly authority. The towering giant waves pressed down, completely shattering the entire continent of Atlantis into countless fragments. Shortly after, these fragments, under the dual action of the tsunami and earthquake, slowly sank into the seawater, swallowed by the waves. Atlantis, this nation personally created by Poseidon, the lord of the sea, now met its end at the hands of Poseidon, the lord of the sea. Inside the ark, the Atlanteans, who had just been teleported there, looked at each other, then all showed expressions of relief at having survived the disaster. And Noah, the Atlantean commoner who had received this revelation and led everyone here as a priest of Mars, was subtly regarded as their leader by his compatriots. "Excuse me." Upon arriving here, Noah did not show as much happiness. He parted the crowd and walked towards a window next to this wooden magical ark, and the people around him also made way for him. He came to a circular window in the cabin. A material was embedded in this window as a baffle, blocking the water outside the ship, yet allowing those inside the cabin to clearly see the outside situation. Noah leaned close to the window, and through the deep, dark ocean, he quickly noticed 4 figures rapidly moving through the sea. They were 4 giants constructed of steel, with metallic wings, and their entire bodies glowed, illuminating the deep ocean. They had their backs to Noah, swimming towards the distant continent, and at the very edge of the window, Noah vaguely saw their homeland and nation, crumbling under divine power, slowly sinking into the ocean. Seeing this scene, Noah let out a soft sigh. He withdrew his gaze, then turned to look at his companions. "Everyone," he said softly, "from today onwards, we are no longer Atlanteans. To avoid retaliation from the minions of the demon Poseidon, we should no longer refer to ourselves as Atlanteans to outsiders." "Then what should we call ourselves?" the people asked. "Latins," Noah said after a moment of thought. "According to the divine revelation, this ship will take us to a land called Latium, and we will take the land's name. From now on, we are Latins." Chapter 129, Chapter 127 Good-looking boy. Ares asking Hecate to drive out the 4 mechanical gods was not actually to have them deal with Poseidon. Even if the 4 mechs could defeat Poseidon together, Ares would not want them to go. These were masterpieces that he and Hecate had painstakingly created, and Ares would be heartbroken if they were even slightly damaged or directly destroyed. Now was not the time for the mechanical gods to confront the Olympus gods. At least, they had to wait until the main god-level mechanical gods were made before the mechanical gods could appear before the world. As for this time, it was just him letting the mechanical gods out for a breather, and incidentally, for Noah to see. In this era, human perspective was still very narrow. From Noah's perspective, he could only see 4 mechanical angels speeding towards the collapsing and sinking Atlantis in the deep sea. As for the subsequent story, Ares left it to them, allowing them to imagine it themselves. After destroying Atlantis, the knot in Poseidon's heart seemed to have slightly lessened. Ares saw him return to his golden palace to vent his frustrations on the Atlanteans' widows. Looking at the sea god's back, Ares shook his head, and then his main body in the underworld created another phantom clone, which he threw into Tartarus. When Poseidon destroyed Atlantis, a large number of Atlanteans' phantoms simultaneously poured into the underworld. Fortunately, Hecate was well prepared, ordering her lamp Hades to pilot the bone boats she had made, assisting the underworld boatman Charon in transporting the phantoms. Otherwise, this brother of the god of death and the god of sleep would probably become the first god in the history of the gods to die from overwork. These Atlanteans were brought by the lamp Hades to the fields of truth, where they were judged by the newly appointed 3 judges, Minos, Aeacus, and Rhadamanthus, in the newly established 3 judges' palace. During this process, it was natural for some to inquire about the situation in Atlantis, and as gods of the underworld pantheon, the 3 judges naturally had no need to fear Poseidon, so they honestly told these Atlanteans the current situation of Atlantis and their widows. Moreover, these Atlanteans used to oppress the common people of Atlantis quite a bit, so they were mostly sentenced to Tartarus, with no chance of ever rising again. However, what the 3 judges did not expect was that a peculiar phantom had appeared in Tartarus. Just as these Atlanteans were sentenced to Tartarus, they saw this unique phantom on the desolate, dead, and toxic land of Hell, filled with deadly gases, poisons, and flames. "Are you also a god of the underworld?" Seeing this phantom blocking the path to Hell, the Atlanteans' phantoms asked him. "No, Atlanteans, who I am is not important." Eerie ghost fires burned beside this phantom. He approached the Atlanteans and whispered to them. "What's important is, do you want revenge on Poseidon or not? Routines, routines. A routine becomes a routine not because it's cliché, but because it's effective." Just like now, Ares used his old trick again in Tartarus, and quickly recruited these Atlanteans' ghosts, training them just as he had trained the humans of the Silver Age many years ago. When the day comes for him to rise up in revolt, this group of phantoms will also become one of his assistants. Not only that, because Hecate has effectively become the ruler of the underworld, in the future, those who harbor resentment towards the gods can also be recruited using the same routine after falling into the underworld, joining his phantom army. Having gained some more living power, Ares happily sent his divine power clone back to Olympus, and then continued to research the creation of mechanical main gods with Hecate in the underworld. After some time passed, one day, Ares' sister, the goddess of youth Hebe, suddenly came to his temple to find him. "Hebe." Ares looked at his sister, not as irritable as he usually acted. He asked, "Do you have something to tell me? Or is Hera looking for me?" Although the goddess of youth Hebe, who stood before Ares, was the daughter of Zeus and heavenly queen Hera, and theoretically the most legitimate princess on Olympus, she was not among the Olympus 12 main gods. Zeus merely assigned her the duty of pouring wine for the gods at banquets. Not only that, what was even more outrageous was that some time ago, Zeus, perhaps influenced by Apollo's remark that cross-dressers are better than women, actually transformed into an eagle and directly abducted Ganymede, the son of the king of Troy. He brought this beautiful youth to the heavens, had Athena lead a group of goddesses to apply beautiful makeup on him, dressed him up as a goddess, and then openly kept him among the Olympus gods as his lover. Sometimes, Ares truly could not understand the brain circuitry of Zeus, this god-king. Not only did he keep Ganymede in front of Hera, making love with this beautiful man in front of Hera, but he also summoned Hebe, casually accused her of stumbling during a wine pouring, and used it as an excuse to dismiss her from her duties as a cup-bearer, then immediately transferred the duties he had stripped from his own daughter to Ganymede. So now, the goddess of youth Hebe became Hera's subordinate deity. Besides staying by her mother's side, she could only run errands and deliver messages for Hera to sustain her life. At a previous banquet, Ares had also seen this legendary beautiful man. He didn't know if Athena's makeup skills were superb, or if Ganymede himself truly had a talent for being a cross-dresser, but in any case, this cup-bearer was indeed very good-looking. But every time he thought of his innocent sister, the goddess of youth Hebe, being so casually cast aside by her own father, Ares felt his god of war divine power throbbing. When he saw Ganymede and Zeus exchanging flirtatious glances, and the effeminate act of Ganymede purposely touching his lips when pouring wine for the god-king, Ares almost wanted to rush up and kick both of them. It wasn't that he hadn't seen Apollo with other boys before. After all, Apollo's partner, well, was also a prince of their Sparta, named Hyacinthus. But Apollo was very self-aware. Before dating Hyacinthus, he first sought the consent of Hyacinthus himself and his father, and also informed Ares. Moreover, when he and Hyacinthus went on dates, they would go to a less crowded place outside the city, knowing to avoid the heroes, especially Ares's eyes and ears, out of sight, out of mind. But Ares simply couldn't stand Ganymede and Zeus. It was too vulgar. Their god-king was simply too vulgar when he was hugging and embracing this man. At this banquet, their actions even made Hestia and Hera so angry that they directly left, and Artemis couldn't bear to watch. So this time, upon seeing Hebe come to him, Ares immediately assumed she was looking for her brother to back her up. So after asking, he continued to press. "Are you here to ask me to help you deal with that effeminate Ganymede?" "No, although that Ganymede, sigh, let's not talk about it." Hebe covered her forehead helplessly and sighed faintly. "Dear Ares, if it were only Ganymede, that would be good." "What's wrong?" Ares was stunned. "Someone else again?" "Yes." Hebe nodded, looking troubled. "Zeus went and harmed another queen. Hera looks a bit strange now, you should go see her quickly." Chapter 130, Chapter 128. Do you want to rebel? When Ares followed Hebe to Hera's temple, Hephaestus had also arrived. It seemed that the goddess of youth, Hebe, had not only notified Ares but also the god of fire, as the eldest son. When Ares and Hebe arrived at the temple, they saw him standing to one side, while Hera sat on her queen's throne, staring silently into a pool of water in front of her. No anger, sorrow, or joy could be seen on her face, her eyes seemed dead. Ares glanced into the pool and saw a familiar man receiving a wailing infant from a midwife. On the bed next to him lay a beautiful woman. However, strangely, neither the man nor the woman showed much happiness at the sight of the newborn. The beautiful woman looked at the man beside her with deep shame, while the man's mouth twitched, unsure whether to cry or laugh. Ares found the man somewhat familiar, so he looked more closely and then discovered his true identity. Amphitryon, Heracles' adoptive father. Greece's most honest man. After recognizing his identity, Ares seemed to faintly see a hint of green above Amphitryon's head. However, even though he recognized Amphitryon and understood the whole story, Ares still asked, to start a conversation. "Hera, who are this couple?" "The king of Thebes, Amphitryon, and his queen, Alcmene. A very well-matched couple, aren't they? Their marriage also received my blessing, but that infant is the child of Alcmene and Zeus." Hera said these words without anger. In fact, as she spoke, a smile even appeared on her face. "Again and again, that man not only disregards our sacred marriage, but now he even destroys a marriage I have blessed." Hebe and Hephaestus were so frightened by their mother's tone that they dared not speak. If Hera had simply erupted in anger and shouted, it would have been better, but her current expressionless demeanor, showing neither sorrow nor joy, made them feel even more horrified. However, after listening to Hera's words, Ares calmly asked in his rough voice. So, what do you plan to do? Will she still take revenge on Alcmene and this Zeus's son? I already did. I sent your sister, my dear daughter, Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to Alcmene's birthing chamber to use her power to prevent that Zeus's son from being born. I wanted to use this method to save my failed marriage with him. But Alcmene truly has a clever maid. Her maid, dear Gerintis, actually dared to falsely transmit my command to Eileithyia, causing Eileithyia's power to fail, and this Zeus's son was ultimately born. Hera murmured. Is it true that everyone in this world will side with that man? What do you think, Ares? No. Ares pointed at Hebe and Hephaestus, then at himself. Aren't the brothers and sisters here all devoted to you? By the way, what did you do with that maid? Hera showed a rather alluring smile. Then, she reached out and, surprisingly, pulled a black cat from behind her throne and threw it on the ground. The black cat, thrown to the ground, lay still, not daring to move. Its deep blue eyes gleamed with human-like fear. Clearly, this was Gerintis, who had deceived the goddess of childbirth and falsely relayed the queen's oracle. She had been transformed into a cat by the enraged Hera. Ares reached out and grabbed the cat by the scruff of its neck, lifting it up, and said to Hera. Hera, I'll help you deal with it. Send it to the underworld. Hera nodded and said, Ares, tell me, what should I do now? Directly killing this Zeus's son, that's impossible. Zeus is clearly watching him too. Ares looked at the figures in the pool and shook his head, and if you ask me, if you truly want to preserve your marriage, killing him is only treating the symptoms, not the root cause. Zeus will not fear these methods of yours. The only way to treat the root cause is to curb Zeus, the source. Curb Zeus. Hearing Ares's words, Hephaestus and Hera showed no reaction, but Hebe was startled. She cautiously looked at her two brothers and whispered, Ares, don't make mother do something foolish. Hebe, don't worry about your brother. He is the god of war, after all, Hera said softly. Ares, continue. Hera, indeed, with our power, even united, we are too weak to contend with Zeus, who holds the authority of the king of gods and divine lightning, Ares said. Therefore, what we need to do is unite all the victims in this world. Victims? Hera raised an eyebrow slightly, as if she had thought of something. That's right. How many of the women he has taken were willing to fall in love with him? How many of the children he has sired truly love him from the bottom of their hearts, rather than fearing him because of his power and status? These people, like us, are all victims. Their individual strength is very small, but once we unite them, their power will be immense. Ares said, nodding towards the pool, this child, Alcmene and Amphitryon, they are all victims too. Are you asking me to help this bastard? Hera sneered. Why not? Becoming Zeus's son is not something he could choose himself, he is not at fault in this matter, Ares persuaded. Now is the time for you to show your magnanimity as queen. Hera, use your motherly power to help this child completely transcend his mortal body, and I will help him become the strongest warrior on Olympus. When he ascends Olympus and becomes one of the gods, it will be easy for you to win him over. With him on our side, a force that Zeus will fear can be formed. The reason he has been so unrestrained before is simply that you could not threaten his rule in any way. But if you have a force to counterbalance him, do you think Zeus will still have the energy to casually run off and fool around with women or men? Hearing Ares's words, Hebe closed her mouth, not daring to interrupt, while Hephaestus, who had kept his eyes closed, cast a somewhat worried glance. He said, Ares, are you planning a rebellion? No. Ares sneered, I'm just speaking out for my mother. After hearing Ares's entire speech, Hera thought for a long time and finally replied hesitantly, "Then, as you say, let's try it this once." Chapter 131, Chapter 129 The Birth of Hercules. After persuading Hera, Ares looked at the pool in Hera's temple. Amphitryon had already handed the baby to a nearby maid and then, looking forlorn, walked onto the palace terrace, gazing up at the starry sky. Ares thought that if he were given a cigarette at this moment, the image of a middle-aged man who had lost his way would emerge. Amphitryon was probably struggling at this time, wondering whether to accept this illegitimate child and whether to retaliate against his unfaithful wife. His wife Alcmene had clearly thought of this as well. She feared that Amphitryon and Hera would harm her child, but as a mother, she was unwilling to watch Heracles die at the hands of Amphitryon and Hera. So, while her husband was on the terrace smoking, she called an old woman who served her and had her take Heracles out of Thebes, abandoning him in the wilderness outside the city. She herself only kept Eurystheus, Amphitryon's biological son, by her side. Seeing the old woman carrying Heracles leave the city through the pool, Ares said to Hera, "Hera, since that's the case, let's go." Hera nodded and rose from her divine throne. Ares handed Gerontis, who had turned into a black cat, to his sister, Hebe, the goddess of youth, asking her to hold him temporarily and that he would retrieve him later. Afterward, Ares and Heavenly Queen Hera went together to the wilderness where the baby had been abandoned. Seeing the old woman sent by Alcmene place Heracles on the ground and hurry away, Ares and Hera approached the infant. Ares somewhat roughly grabbed the swaddling clothes of the infant Heracles, lifted him up, and said to Hera, "Hera, please use your motherly power to help him shed his mortal body." Hera took the baby from Ares's hand and said, "Ares, turn your head." Oh! Ares turned his back, and Hera unfastened her bodice, beginning to nurse Heracles. Hera, representing the Heavenly Queen, was also the mother of all gods. If she wished, she could secrete milk, and if anyone drank her milk, they could shed their mortal body and become a god. Heracles already had a portion of Zeus's blood flowing within him, and with Hera's milk, this not only allowed him to shed his fragile human part but also made him a god with powerful divine energy flowing through his body. Perhaps as an infant, he was still fragile to the chief gods, but Heracles also inherited human growth potential from Alcmene, making his future limitless. While Ares was turned away, waiting for Hera to nurse Heracles, and incidentally observing the surroundings to see if Athena was causing trouble nearby, he suddenly heard a cry of pain from Hera. He turned around and saw the Heavenly Queen angrily throw Heracles onto the ground, one hand clutching her chest. Clearly, Heracles, who hadn't eaten since birth, was hungry. So, when Hera nursed him, he greedily sucked with force, biting the Heavenly Queen. Hera was already displeased with him, so she naturally wouldn't show him any more respect and simply threw the baby onto the ground. Fortunately, Heracles, having drunk Hera's milk, had already shed his mortal body and become a heavenly god. Even being thrown to the ground by the Heavenly Queen, he was perfectly fine. Instead, he looked at Hera with wide eyes, making the unique laughing sounds of a baby. Ares picked him up again and said to Hera, "Hera, leave the rest to me. I will return him to his parents. Please return to the Heavenly Queen's palace and wait." Hera tidied her clothes, nodded somewhat indignantly, and then left without looking back. Ares, carrying Heracles in his swaddling clothes, walked into the palace of King Amphitryon of Thebes. Hearing of Ares's visit, King Amphitryon of Thebes dared not be negligent. He quickly came out to greet him. Ares had him dismiss everyone around, then placed Heracles, still in his swaddling clothes, into his hands. "Here, this baby, he's your wife's son, isn't he?" "This." Amphitryon held Heracles, his face alternating between green and red. He was a smart man and quickly understood the cause and effect. Clearly, his wife Alcmene also feared his retaliation against this child, so she had quietly had her subordinates send the baby out of Thebes while he was cooling down on the palace terrace. It was just a coincidence that the baby immediately encountered Ares, who was wandering nearby, and was thus sent back by him. Seeing Ares's actions, Amphitryon thought he understood the god's intentions. He bit his lip in humiliation and bowed to Ares, saying, "I will raise this child, Ares, please rest assured." "Alas, you make it sound like I'm forcing you." Ares sighed, then pointed a finger, and a barrier of fiery divine power formed around him and Amphitryon. "All right, now the other gods shouldn't be able to hear us." Having done all this, Ares sat down cross-legged in front of Amphitryon. "Sit down, we can now have a good talk about Zeus's problem, Amphitryon." Seeing this, Amphitryon carefully sat down on the spot with Heracles in his arms, then gave a bitter smile. "I wouldn't dare to criticize the king of the gods, great Ares. You merely fear his power and authority, Amphitryon. Let's not dwell on that for now, and stick to the facts. What Zeus did, if he weren't the king of the gods, you would have killed him long ago, wouldn't you?" Ares asked. "It probably wouldn't be up to me." Amphitryon sighed with a very complex expression. "Alcmene would have directly killed him. In fact, I learned the full story from Alcmene, and it really isn't her fault. It's good that you understand. And it's not the fault of the child in your arms either." Ares nodded. "All things considered, the culprit is none other than Zeus. If it weren't for that old pervert, none of this would have happened." Ares. Hearing Ares curse Zeus on his behalf, Amphitryon looked up at him in surprise. "Don't be so surprised. Do you really think that we, as Zeus's sons, truly like him as a father?" Ares chuckled. "As far as I know, among all Zeus's sons on Olympus, it seems only Hermes truly likes him. We are just like you, also, without enough power to confront him." Ares. Amphitryon's gaze towards Ares suddenly held more recognition. He whispered, "But even if you tell me this, I am powerless to change anything. Even great gods cannot contend with Zeus, so what am I? Yes, you are merely mortal, but the child in your arms is not." Ares pointed to Heracles in the swaddling clothes. "What do you mean?" Amphitryon asked. "Even if he is a demigod, he can't contend with Zeus, can he?" "No, just a short while ago, Hera helped him shed his mortal body." Ares winked at Amphitryon and then said, "Hera also bestowed a name upon him. His name is Heracles. Do you understand what I mean?" Chapter 132, Chapter 130 Athena's Party. Heracles, meaning glory given by Hera. Since Ares said Hera gave Heracles this name, it means that the Queen of Heaven intended to spare this innocent child born from Zeus's infidelity. Amphitryon hesitated to kill Heracles partly because of Hera. Alcmene was seduced and raped by Zeus, giving birth to a child, which put her on the jealous Queen of Heaven's blacklist. If he had been decisive and killed Heracles himself, Hera might have forgiven his wife and stopped targeting Alcmene. Now, with Ares's assurance, Hera would certainly not do anything more to his wife, and Amphitryon was completely relieved. He also did not want to kill Heracles, who was an innocent victim. So he made an agreement with Ares that he would treat Heracles well and regard him as his own son. After repeatedly cautioning Amphitryon to act as usual, Ares removed the divine power barrier and departed contentedly. However, he did not go far. He circled around, transformed back into a bird, and returned to Thebes' royal palace. Heracles is such an important hero that Athena could not possibly not participate in this gamble. Ares's previous actions had already cost her the opportunity to bestow the greatest favor upon Heracles. Moreover, since Ares had already convinced Hera, Hera naturally could not send giant pythons to secretly harm Heracles. If Athena truly succumbed to the fates, she should be doing something now to force Heracles' fate to conform to the destiny set by the fates. Ares stood on the eaves of Thebes' royal palace, quietly waiting for a moment, and then, as expected, he saw Athena. In the darkness, the goddess walked quietly. She carried no weapons or scepters, only wearing her usual dress and a helmet. Upon arriving in front of Thebes' royal palace, Athena quietly observed the palace, then raised her hand and gently pointed towards where Heracles and Eurystheus, the two brothers, were sleeping. Under her command, accompanied by hissing sounds, two giant venomous snakes quietly slithered into the palace while the guards and maids at the palace entrance were not paying attention. Ares, seeing this scene, naturally would not let it go. As early as Athena's arrival, he had already taken out a crystal made by Hecate, which had a recording function, and secretly recorded everything to serve as evidence for Heracles in the future. A moment after the two venomous snakes entered the palace, a mournful cry of a baby suddenly erupted from within Thebes' royal palace. Hearing this sound, Amphitryon, who was inside the palace, quickly rushed to where the crying came from. He brought two guards to his children's bedroom and was greatly startled by the sight before him. In this bedroom, the cradles of the two infants, Heracles and Eurystheus, were placed side by side. Eurystheus was wailing in his cradle, while Heracles' side was filled with his happy laughter. Amphitryon saw that Heracles, lying in his cradle, had actually grabbed a venomous snake by the neck with each hand. He was playing with these two venomous snakes, whose heads were larger than human fists, with great abandon. His strength was even greater than that of many adults. The two venomous snakes, whose necks he had grabbed, were actually strangled to death by him. Seeing this scene, Amphitryon had not yet recovered, when suddenly, the voice of a familiar goddess echoed in his mind. Amphitryon. Hearing this voice, Amphitryon was startled and quickly replied in his mind. Respected Athena, may I ask what you need from me? Just to tell you, don't panic. Raise this child well. Athena said softly. These two venomous snakes were sent by Hera, and they are also a trial for this child. He will grow up to be the most unique hero in the world and will become your pride. Hera, but didn't Ares say? Recalling Ares's warning before he left, Amphitryon quickly stopped his baseless conjectures. He took a deep breath, agreed to the goddess in his heart, then walked to Heracles, snatched the dead venomous snakes from his small hands and threw them away, then hugged him and said, "This child will surely become the greatest hero in world history." Well said, my king. After Amphitryon finished speaking, an old voice suddenly sounded behind him. He turned his head and saw the priest of Thebes had arrived, looking at Heracles, whom Amphitryon was holding up, with a look of gratification. Priest? Amphitryon asked curiously, why are you here? Because I received an oracle from the gods. The priest, who was naturally also Ares's alternate account, said with a chuckle, I will teach him all sorts of knowledge about the gods, King Amphitryon, is that all right? After doing all this, Athena, after gazing at Amphitryon for a moment, leisurely turned and headed towards Olympus. At this moment, an ethereal voice also sounded in her mind, a voice from the fate goddess with whom she had made a deal. Athena. She reminded the goddess of wisdom. Amphitryon no longer trusts you much. I know, that's natural. On this matter, we've lost the initiative. Athena replied with a smile and a relaxed tone. The priest in Thebes is clearly also Ares's person. With him by Amphitryon's side, I suppose Heracles won't favor me when he goes to Olympus in the future. If this continues, you'll lose to Ares. Atropos, the fate goddess, said to her. If even you lose, then we will have to consider giving up on you directly. Oh, that's unreasonable, isn't it? Athena blinked and retorted, no matter what, the priority should always be to ensure history stays on track. For that, even the priority of dealing with Ares can be pushed back. Isn't that what you told me? That depends on your own ability. Atropos, the fate goddess, said rather heartlessly. Remember your place, Athena. To outsiders, you are a supreme goddess, a power second only to Zeus, but before fate, even Zeus must yield. Yes, I understand, of course. A trace of displeasure flashed in Athena's eyes, but she hid it well. She smiled and agreed. Feel free to command me. I will do my best to defeat Ares, please rest assured. Chapter 133, Chapter 131 The Best Dad in the World. After this series of actions, Ares successfully made his clone one of Heracles' teachers. Good concepts should be instilled from a young age. Ares did not want Heracles to grow up into a tyrannical scoundrel like Zeus. In his opinion, Zeus's blame could even be placed on Gaia, because in the beginning, Zeus, who had escaped from Kronos' clutches, was clearly raised by someone sent by the planetary suppressive force. Although he didn't know which irresponsible scoundrel raised him, it was clear that Zeus's foster parent only took responsibility for raising him, not for teaching him, which led to Zeus becoming who he is today. However, now, with Ares's clone in charge of early education, he wasn't worried about Heracles becoming like Zeus. Fortunately, because the moral and ethical concepts of the Greek gods were generally below the normal human standard, Ares only needed to teach Heracles to be a normal person, which would be enough for him to become a morally upright and pure-hearted hero in Greece. Heracles was temporarily stabilized, but at the same time as his birth, many Argo heroes were also born in the Greek world in the same era, such as Atalanta, Theseus, Peleus, and so on. It's worth noting that the Argo of the golden-haired Jason carried a total of 50 famous Greek Argo heroes. Although in Ares's view, the quality of these 50 people varied, and the character of many could hardly be called hero, these 50 Greek Argo heroes were all objects of contention and struggle between him and Athena. Fortunately, Ares did not intend to control all 50 of these Argo heroes. He already felt that a portion of them were unworthy as Argo heroes, and frankly, apart from Heracles, the other Argo heroes would be mostly useless in his war against Olympus. Therefore, apart from a few whom he considered victims of the gods' conspiracies and would try to rescue, he only needed to protect the great hero Heracles and prevent him from falling into darkness. Heracles' matters temporarily came to an end. Inside the hall of Ares's divine power clone stood up. He was pondering whether to remind Artemis to pay attention to any female infants that might be abandoned in the wilderness by irresponsible kings who favored sons over daughters, but just then, his brother, Apollo, walked over with an anxious expression and called out to him. Ares, are you free now? What's wrong? Ares temporarily put aside his thoughts and asked, did someone steal your stuff again? Apollo said, though he didn't seem very angry. Ares then asked curiously, is it cattle again? No. Apollo shook his head. This time, someone stole my woman. Hey! Ares was greatly astonished. Stole your woman? Doesn't that mean they cuckolded you? Why aren't you angry? Because I've already dealt with the woman who cuckolded me, Apollo shook his head. What happened? Seeing Apollo's hesitation and incomplete explanation, Ares sensed something was amiss and pressed for details. Under his repeated questioning, Apollo finally revealed the truth to him. It turned out that some time ago, Apollo's lover, Hyacinthus, had accidentally died during a date, hit by a discus Apollo himself had thrown. Apollo was heartbroken, but during this time, he fell in love with a woman named Coronis. Various unmentionable things happened during this period. In short, this woman later became pregnant with his child, but during this process, she fell in love with another man named Ischys. A crow came and informed Apollo, who then flew into a rage and directly shot the woman. Her lover Ischys was also shot by Apollo's sister, Artemis, when she came to his defense. However, at this time, because Coronis was already pregnant, Apollo, before her cremation, cut open her belly and took out the still living child inside. This was nothing. In this era, even if a king was betrayed, many would kill their queen. From gods to mortals, the status of women in the age of gods was generally lower than that of men. Except for people like Ares, who had concepts from the 21st century, few would treat women of equal standing with equality. Not to mention Apollo was a noble god. Currently, his prestige among the general public in the Greek world was even higher than that of Ares, Zeus, and others. For such a god to be cuckolded, his merely killing the adulterer and his own woman was already considered merciful to the Greeks. However, after finishing, Apollo then said in a somewhat ashamed whisper, "Actually, Coronis didn't betray me. Isis was just her servant, and nothing happened between them." Ah! Ares widened his eyes upon hearing this. "Then didn't you kill the wrong person?" "Yes." Apollo coughed and mumbled, "So I turned the crow that informed me into black. But Coronis's soul has already gone to Hades, and I can't get her back. I can only try to compensate her." "Oh." Ares thought for a moment. "So what does that have to do with you coming to me? I can't go to Hades to get her soul back for you." Actually, he could, but Ares and Hecate didn't want to set a precedent for such things. Apollo hesitated, then beckoned to Ares, "You'll know if you come with me." Ares, full of suspicion, followed Apollo to his temple of light. Inside the temple, Ares saw a small cradle, and in it, a white-haired male infant was quietly sleeping, sucking his thumb. "His name is Asclepius, my child with Coronis." Apollo scratched his golden hair, somewhat distressed, and said, "But he's just a demigod. Olympus can't accept him, and I don't know where to raise him. Why didn't you consider this when you were busy doing the deed?" Ares questioned with a pair of dead fish eyes. "Hee hee." Apollo chuckled softly, a bit embarrassed. At that time, who had the mind to think about that? Ares stared at the infant and asked again, "What did you say his name was just now?" "Asclepius." "Asclepius. Oh, the Greek doctor Asclepius." Ares remembered the legend of this child. Asclepius was the best physician in the Greek world and had a compassionate heart. Through his efforts, the number of deaths throughout Greece greatly decreased, and Hades's underworld was even empty of phantoms for a time. Asclepius's medical skills also reached a level where he could snatch people from Hades's grasp. What he was most famous for was the immortality elixir he concocted using the Gorgon's blood bestowed by Athena. However, because Asclepius's medical skills were too profound, Zeus felt that if this continued, humans would no longer fear death, and his authority as the king of gods would be completely gone. So he simply sent down a divine lightning bolt, directly striking down the innocent Asclepius. This Dr. Asclepius was also one of the Argo heroes on the Argo, and he was also a hero Ares planned to recruit. So, after some thought, Ares said to Apollo, "This is easy. I know the best babysitter in the world. I'll help you entrust this child to him for upbringing." Chapter 134, Chapter 132 Educator. "Chiron, I'll leave this child to you." Inside the cave of Pelion, Ares handed the infant, who had white hair despite not yet growing up, to the gentle-looking, long-haired centaur before him. "He is Asclepius, the son of Apollo and Coronis. I hope you can raise him well. Leave him to me." Chiron gently took the infant from Ares, then, with a posture far more professional than Ares's, embraced Asclepius. He lowered his head, carefully examined Asclepius's face, and then chuckled. "What a clever child! He will surely become a great healer in the future. I didn't expect you to be proficient in divination as well." Ares was a little surprised. "It's all right. After all, I love learning, so I once studied divination from Prometheus." Chiron gently placed Asclepius on a soft cushion, then cast a spell, weaving a cradle on the spot. "Just as I also learned a bit of magic from Hecate, medicine and music from Apollo, and archery from Artemis. Of course, this also includes the combat techniques for various weapons you taught me not long ago, and that unarmed combat art, pankration." Ares watched him skillfully prepare various items for Asclepius and couldn't help but ask, "Do you need any compensation? That kid Apollo only cares about conceiving and not raising, but he can provide living expenses. No, no. After all, when I learned medicine and music from Apollo, he didn't charge me any compensation. Consider this my way of repaying him." Chiron smiled and shook his head. "Besides, I quite enjoy educating people myself. Look, I even picked up a child from outside and brought him back." With that, he carried Asclepius's cradle and led Ares into the back room of the cave. There, Ares saw another cradle, containing a golden-haired infant who was trying to stuff his foot into his mouth. However, the moment he saw Ares enter, the little infant cried out with a wah. Chiron quickly placed Asclepius's cradle nearby, then went over to comfort the little blonde. Hearing the crying, Asclepius also woke up. Apollo's son was much calmer. He actually sat up by himself from the cradle and, using his hands to cling to the edge of the cradle, stared with deadpan eyes at the crying blonde infant in Chiron's arms. Seeing this, Ares also retreated from the cave. Chiron comforted the infant inside for a long time before emerging with a wry smile, apologizing to Ares. "I'm sorry, Ares. He usually doesn't cry. I don't know why he cried so much today. Perhaps the smell of blood on me is too strong." Ares glanced into the cave, just in time to see Apollo's son, Asclepius, quietly pick up a toy from the table and throw it into the little blonde's cradle. So he continued to ask, "What's that child's name?" "His name is Jason, the son of Ezon, king of Thessaly," Chiron said with a smile. "He will be the heir of Thessaly, and a future captain who will embark on a glorious journey with a host of great heroes." "Since you already know, then teach him more about moral character," Ares said. "For example, don't lie to women, don't lie to women, and don't lie to women." "How can I teach this?" Chiron scratched his head, a little troubled. "I don't have any experience interacting with women myself." "Then forget it," Ares sighed. "I'll figure something out in the future. You truly work hard." Chiron looked at Ares, then hesitated and said, "Ares, is there really nothing else you need my help with?" "What do you mean?" Ares asked in return. "Although I am a god, compared to gods who are immortal and ageless, with almost no change from birth to maturity, I prefer humans who are born imperfect but constantly strive forward with that imperfection," Chiron said meaningfully. "While I cannot stand at the forefront to oppose my former brethren, if you need me to instruct a few individuals, I can certainly do it." As he said this, Ares understood his meaning. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "Aren't you afraid Athena and Zeus will mess with you?" "I'm just a teacher, what does it have to do with me?" Chiron replied with a smile. "Besides, this is for the sake of the students. You could say it's a small arrogance of an educator." "Heh." Ares couldn't help but smile upon hearing his words. He replied, "All right then, I won't be polite." He thought for a moment, then first said to Chiron, "So now, Chiron, I would like to ask you to teach someone, as compensation for me teaching you pankration and various combat techniques." "Who?" Chiron asked. "He is Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, the adopted son of Amphitryon, king of Thebes, and Greece's greatest hero to be," Ares said. "In a few years, I will send someone to notify you. At that time, I hope you can agree to teach him archery and martial arts." "No problem," Chiron readily agreed. "And then, I hope you can raise the next infant I send." Ares stroked his chin and continued to make his request. Chiron, being an enthusiast of education, naturally did not refuse and quickly agreed. After settling the terms with Chiron, Ares's true form went directly to Hecate's garden in the underworld, and asked his reclusive teacher, who was relaxing in a rocking chair, "Teacher, would you mind telling my fortune?" "Hey!" Hecate heard him, removed the blindfold from her eyes, blinked, and asked in surprise, "What fortune are you asking for now?" "I can't calculate anything involving powerful figures, go find Apollo or Prometheus yourself." "It's not about any powerful figures." Ares smiled, unfurled the parchment in his hand, and displayed a long list of names to Hecate. I just want to ask you to see which of these people haven't been born yet. Several years passed in a flash. Years later, on the lawn in front of the Pelion cave, a few young children were sitting properly, watching the tall centaur in front of them lead another boy of similar age. This boy was robust and his physique could almost rival that of Heracles, the strongest among them. Chiron led him close to the group of children, and then announced to the heroes. "This is Perseus, my new student, your new companion. Everyone, please treat him well." Chapter 135, Chapter 133 Perseus. Perseus, of the constellation Perseus, Zeus's son with Danae, was imprisoned in a high tower by her father, Acrisius, due to a prophecy that the child born to Princess Danae would eventually kill his father. During this time, Zeus transformed into Golden Rain and met with her, and from their union, Perseus was born. He was also, in the original myth, the goddess of wisdom Athena's foremost sycophant. After Hecate's calculations, Perseus had not yet been born in this world. Oddly enough, Heracles' mother, Alcmene, was supposed to be Persephone's granddaughter in legend. After Ares told Hecate about this, the moon goddess thought for a moment and then replied, "Perhaps the flow of this world was altered the moment Ares transformed into Cadmus." The course of history was forcibly accelerated by him, and the stories of numerous Argo heroes were rapidly pushed to the forefront by an unseen hand. This matter itself was not a big deal. Although Heracles and Perseus are two of the few Argo heroes in Greek mythology confirmed to be blood relatives, the timeline of Greek mythology is inherently very chaotic. Within Greece, due to the belief in polytheism, there were numerous sects, and the legends of each sect differed. Furthermore, each sect hoped that their main gods and Argo heroes could lord over other sects. Over time, this led to the peculiar phenomenon of a chaotic Greek mythology timeline. If one were to truly follow the timeline of Greek mythology, putting everything else aside, just taking the Argo heroes as an example, more than half of the 50 Argo heroes who sailed with Heracles died at his hands either before or during the Argo heroes' voyage. Could it be that the Argo heroes was a new battle royale map at sea? Was Heracles the toxic zone at sea? It seems highly unlikely. Therefore, Ares did not take this matter too seriously. Although this might be a sign that he had altered some fate, as Hecate said, fate had already been changed the moment he interfered with the affairs of humanity in the Silver Age. However, Perseus's identity as Athena's foremost sycophant and Zeus's son was still an excellent bargaining chip to exploit. Ares put a lot of thought into crafting this identity. He first went to Argos, found Princess Danae, who was imprisoned in a high tower by King Acrisius of Argos, rescued her with divine power, and then sent her to live in Sparta, the sanctuary of Ares. Subsequently, Hecate, in her capacity as regent of the underworld, ordered Hypnos, the god of sleep, to personally visit Olympus. He used his divine power to make Zeus, who was engaged in intimate activities with Ganymede, fall into a deep slumber, and then made him dream of transforming into Golden Rain and meeting the human princess Danae. Hypnos is a second-generation god. Although he usually lives a bit numbly and is a bit simple-minded, his skills are not to be underestimated. Although he cannot defeat Zeus, he can make Zeus fall into a dream. As for Zeus himself, if he gives him a spring dream, he will certainly not blame the god of sleep. Besides, he himself doesn't know how many women he has been with, so he will most likely take this spring dream as real. The only one to be careful of is Athena, and that's easy to handle. After gaining control of Persephone, a great weapon against Athena, in the underworld, whenever Ares needs to cause trouble, he only needs to go to the queen of the underworld's palace and tell Persephone to take her to play with Athena. Then the queen of the underworld will be very happy to help Ares distract Athena's attention. Next was Perseus's physical problem, which was also easy to handle. With the selfless dedication of the friendly Poseidon's son, Halirothias, Ares and Hecate had long understood the physical structure of the fourth-generation gods. As for a demigod body, that was even simpler. Ares already had Zeus's blood in his body. He only needed to extract some spiritual particles from it, and Hecate could effortlessly create a demigod body with Zeus's bloodline. And ever since his identity as Cadmus was seen through by the goddess of fate Kratos last time, Ares had implemented various protective measures on his clones. These were all magic and sorcery taught to him by Hecate, used to block the perception of the suppression force. As for why Hecate knows this kind of magic, well, she's a sorceress, don't ask, just say it's for work. Under Chiron's intentional or unintentional guidance, Perseus quickly mingled with a group of Greece's future Argo heroes and soon stood out among them, becoming the strongest. Even Heracles was not his match. After all, Heracles was still a bare-bottomed child at that time, possessing divine power but lacking mature martial arts and combat experience. He simply couldn't defeat a small account personally controlled by Ares. However, one day, just as Ares was controlling Perseus's small account, beating a group of future Greek Argo heroes until they screamed, Hecate suddenly appeared beside Ares's main body and asked him, "Ares, I want to discuss something with you." According to the time, Hecate should be on duty in Hades's Black Palace right now, but Ares was used to her acting as the temporary queen of the underworld, working 3 days and resting 2. Originally, her clone was covering for her in Hades's palace. When subordinates like the twin gods, the 3 judges, or the Styx ferryman asked her questions, Hecate's clone would only answer with a concise approved or not approved. And the only major concern in the underworld, Persephone, had also been controlled by Hecate and Ares using the Athena doll method. She stayed in her palace every day, playing intimate games with that doll, so happy that she forgot to return. Therefore, it was not strange for Hecate to be leisurely strolling around at this time. However, Ares had never seen such a hesitant expression on Hecate's face, so he asked, "All right, teacher, what do you want to discuss with me?" "It's like this." Hecate carefully considered her words, then slowly said, "Ares, would you mind having another younger sister?" "A younger sister?" Ares asked in surprise, "Are you pregnant? Or is Hera pregnant again? When did this happen?" "It's not about that," the moon goddess said, "I'm talking about a junior disciple, a junior disciple." She explained the matter in detail to Ares, and then Ares understood. It turned out that in earlier years, Hecate had owed a favor to Helios, god of the Sunday. After the emergence of humans, Helios, following the footsteps of Zeus, had also left his bloodline on earth. His descendants became royalty and then established a kingdom on Colchis. Colchis had now passed down to King Aetes' generation. King Aetes had a beloved daughter who was found to possess extraordinary magical talent from a young age. According to the requirements Ares had put forth to human ancestors in the Silver Age, such a promising individual naturally needed proper education to help her achieve her potential. So, King Aetes prayed to Helios, hoping the sun god would use his authority to help this princess find a sufficiently high-ranking teacher. At this time, Helios remembered Hecate, the goddess of magic, who had already retreated into the underworld. He used their past connection to approach her, hoping Hecate could take this princess as her apprentice. "King Aetes' sister Circe is also one of my subordinate deities, I taught her some magic in the early years," Hecate said. "This family is also my distant relative, so when Helios came to me, I couldn't ignore him. So that's it." Ares thought for a moment and couldn't help but find it amusing. He said, "Teacher, I didn't expect you to even ask for my opinion on taking on an apprentice. Isn't taking on an apprentice something you should decide on your own?" "Yes," Hecate said, narrowing her eyes at Ares. "If my first disciple hadn't provoked the planetary suppression force and only had 200 years to live, forcing me, his teacher, to help him hide things, I would have already brought in a second disciple." Hearing Hecate's words, Ares awkwardly rubbed his nose and, changing the subject, asked, "What's this princess's name?" "Medea." Hecate thought for a moment and replied, "I remember that's the correct name." Medea. Hearing this name, Ares was startled. This princess was closely connected to the myth of the Argo heroes, and in the future, she would be a prominent figure on the heroic spirit throne. Her magical skills were indeed very superb and exquisite. The myth did not elaborate on who Medea learned her magic from, but now it seems her magic was very likely taught by Hecate, the goddess of magic. And the birth of this princess also indicated that the Argo heroes would begin their adventures within a few years. So, after thinking for a moment, Ares said to Hecate, "Teacher, taking on this apprentice is no problem, but please allow me to prepare first." "What do you need to prepare?" Hecate asked with some curiosity. "A new identity," Ares replied without looking back. "Teacher, it's better to be safe than sorry. Although Princess Medea is just an innocent little girl right now, I don't want to expose our secret in front of her. If she were to reveal it in the future, our master-disciple duo would probably have to go study magic with the Titans. Medea can become Hecate's disciple, but she must be the third disciple." After hearing this, Hecate agreed with the reasoning. So, she waved her hand and said, "Do as you please then. I'll go bring Medea over now. Hurry up." During the time Hecate left the underworld to go to Colchis to pick up her new apprentice, Perseus, who was originally chasing and hitting Heracles with a spear, suddenly threw down his spear and looked towards the horizon. Heracles, who was desperately swinging a wooden stick, trying to block Perseus's spear, stopped in surprise when he saw this. He looked at him and asked, "Perseus, what's wrong?" "Heracles, there's a limit to martial arts," Perseus said with a weathered tone. "I've learned one thing from this short life: the more humans delve into martial arts, the more they perceive its limits and fall into difficulties, unless they transcend the limitations of martial arts." "What do you mean?" "Perseus, what are you talking about?" Heracles asked, confused. "What I mean is..." Perseus stomped his foot abruptly, pointed at a group of Argo heroes he had beaten black and blue, and loudly declared, "I'm not learning martial arts anymore." Heracles. After speaking, he laughed heartily and ran into the distance, leaving only his words in the wind, "I want to transcend martial arts with magic." Hearing Perseus's wild laughter, a group of young Argo heroes were terrified, and Heracles put down his wooden stick, turning to Chiron who had walked out and was looking at Perseus's retreating figure. He asked, "Teacher, has Perseus gone mad?" "Don't mind him, let him be." Chiron gently lowered his head, stroked Heracles's head, and then said loudly, "Even if Perseus leaves, don't slack off on your training. Come, continue. The most important thing in learning is constant review, and this is the same in martial arts. Pick up your weapons, today's training is far from over." Chapter 136, Chapter 134. A good magician is one who does not hold a wand. While Ares secretly opened a back door for teleportation, bringing Perseus's alt account to Hecate's garden, he also communicated with Hecate via magic private message. The two coordinated their stories, and then Hecate began to use some mysterious spatial magic techniques to directly pull the young Medea from Colchis to the netherworld. Taking advantage of this, Ares hid his true body, leaving only Perseus's clone here to await Hecate and Medea. A moment later, within the barrier of Hecate's garden in the netherworld, a spatial teleportation gate opened out of thin air, and then Hecate, now in the form of a young woman, slowly arrived here, leading a lovely little girl. The lovely little girl was wearing a beautiful white long dress with a faint purple trim, and like Hecate, she also had long, beautiful purple hair, though slightly lighter than Hecate's. Her long hair was tied into a single ponytail with a beautiful hair tie, falling behind her. Perhaps due to her divine bloodline, the little girl's ears were somewhat pointed, and her fair face also had a pair of beautiful purple eyes. While Ares observed Medea through Perseus's eyes, Medea was also looking at him with curious eyes. Hecate led Medea to Ares and introduced him to her. "Medea, let me introduce you. This is also my disciple." His name is no, Perseus, Ares interjected. Yes, his name is Perseus. Hecate's face flushed slightly, she coughed, exchanged a glance with Ares, and then, with a seasoned demeanor, instructed Medea, he started earlier than you and knows more magic. If you have any questions you don't understand later, you can ask me, but if you can't find me, you can also ask him. I understand, teacher, Medea nodded, replying clearly. Oh, and if you have any difficulties in life, you can also go to Perseus. Hecate thought for a moment, then said, after all, you two are human, while I am a deity. I can't understand some of the physiological needs you have. Medea nodded rapidly. Good. Hecate patted the little girl's head, then pushed her towards Ares. Today, let your senior brother take you through the introductory magic lessons, Perseus. Hey, teacher, Ares caught the little girl Medea, who Hecate had pushed towards him, and then asked using voice transmission, are you really going to make me teach her? Why not? Hecate retorted, your magic level is pretty much advanced, isn't it? And besides, Medea won't understand the magic we're researching anyway. Why don't you teach her whatever you think is best, and whatever she wants to learn, you teach her that. You just want to push your disciple onto me so you can do your own thing, right? Ares complained. Well, if you want me to teach, then I won't help you with that mechanical god. How does that sound? Hecate rolled her eyes. Ares was speechless. He thought for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, fine, I'll just teach her whatever. If this girl turns into someone with a very strange personality later, don't blame me. Their exchange was completed in a flash of lightning. So, when Perseus heard Hecate's call, from Medea's perspective, he merely paused for a moment, then nodded and agreed. All right, I understand, teacher. Hecate waved her hand, happily handing Medea over to Ares, then rested for a while, and went back to her research in the Netherworld magic workshop. Ares, holding Medea's hand, said to her. Come with me, Medea. Taking this little princess, Ares walked with her into Hecate's tree palace, and then, with practiced ease, led her to the magic texts he had studied when he first started. Looking at these magic texts, Ares let go of Medea's hand, then turned to her, raising a finger somewhat seriously, and asked. Medea, before you learn magic, can you tell me what kind of magic you want to learn? What kind? Medea looked up, a little confused, and asked, does magic have different types? Of course it does. Although, theoretically, both magicians and magicians can learn any kind, a person's energy is limited, especially since we humans are not like teacher Hecate, who is a deity, ageless and immortal, with endless lifespan to continue researching. Ares explained. Therefore, after the rise of humanity, magicians gradually categorized magic and magic into various types, or, we could call them magic specializations. Oh, I see. So, what's your specialization, senior brother? Medea asked curiously. Senior brother specializes in pure yang, Ares puffed out his chest, saying somewhat proudly, as long as I remain a virgin until I'm 30, senior brother can become an omnipotent grand magician. Oh, how amazing! Medea clapped her hands and said, then senior brother, I want to learn pure yang specialization too. Ahem, that's not possible. Girls can't learn that, Ares shook his head and said, this specialization is male exclusive. Ah, alright then, Medea was a little disappointed, but being a child, she didn't dwell on it much. Soon her attention shifted to another aspect. She asked, then senior brother, I want to learn magic that can drive away pain, illness, and wounds. Oh, you want to learn healing magic? Ares stroked his chin, then took 2 stone tablets from the bookshelf. That's not difficult. This kind of magic originally derived from the authority of Dr. Asclepius Apollo. After it appeared, our teacher Hecate also organized its system. As he placed the stone tablets on the ground, he put his hands on his hips and asked Medea, "All right, this magic also has a few branches. Which one do you want to become?" "Dear, senior brother recommends you become a raging support." "Raging support?" Medea sounded a little scared. "That sounds so scary. Are there others?" Raging support, which is gentle, is already the most suitable for girls," Ares thought for a moment, then said, "The remaining ones are arbitrator paladin, soothing monk, and dirty priest." Senior brother, these three specializations all sound so scary," Medea mumbled. "What do they all do?" "They are hammer wielders, fist fighters, and those who spec in mental control as a secondary," Ares thought for a moment and replied, "By the way, the previous raging support uses a sword. Shouldn't magicians wear robes and carry wands?" Medea asked blankly. "How could that be? As a magic master, one naturally needs to develop comprehensively in virtue, intelligence, physique, aesthetics, and labor." Ares rubbed Medea's head, patiently coaxing, "Senior brother tells you, in the magic world, those who can only use magic are noobs. The magicians who don't carry wands are the truly powerful ones. For a true magic master, a wand is just a tool to enchant their main weapon." Chapter 137, Chapter 135 Friar. Afterward, Medea inquired about other specialized professions, such as elemental magicians, psychic magicians, and puppeteers, but Ares brushed her off with professions like elemental magic sword master, mind-controlling backstabbing master, and 18 bronze men puppeteer. After much thought, Medea still chose to become a healing-focused magician. No matter how violently Ares portrayed the profession, it could at least heal others. However, although Medea chose to become a healing magician, she did not choose the raging support profession Ares recommended. She felt that as a magician, it was proper to wield a magic staff. So, Ares recommended she become a soothing monk. Although, theoretically, a raging support could also conceal a sword within a magic staff, Ares thought it would be more visually impactful for a beautiful girl to simply discard the staff and rush into close combat barehanded. After Medea chose her specialization, Ares immediately began to devise a corresponding training regimen for her. First, he naturally prepared various healing and auxiliary magic, from beginner to advanced to mastery levels, all of which Ares had to select. Secondly, Ares also prepared a series of physical training courses for the young Medea, as well as various powerful combat techniques, including pankration. Moreover, Ares discovered something: Medea was different from him. As a chief god, Ares was naturally able to understand most divine texts, but Medea could not. And the magic written by Hecate was mostly recorded in divine texts to maintain its mystery. Therefore, before Medea could learn magic and sorcery, Ares also had to take on the role of a language teacher, teaching her divine texts. After Ares finished noting down Medea's future plans on a papyrus, he looked up and found Medea sitting quietly beside him, obediently staring at him. "What a good child!" Ares sighed inwardly. In truth, it was the fault of Olympus that Medea, this lovely princess, would later degenerate into a sorceress who wouldn't even bat an eye at killing her own kin. When Jason sailed to Medea's kingdom, Colchis, he was met with difficulties by King Aetes, Medea's father. To help Jason and the Argo heroes on the ship escape their predicament, the gods simply had Aphrodite bring her annoying son, Eros, and shoot an arrow at Medea while she was looking at Jason. Thus, the naive sorceress fell hopelessly in love with Jason. This love, forcibly induced by the gods, could be said to be no less than a curse of madness. Medea, caught in the whirlpool of love, forgot everything: her subjects, parents, and siblings. Her eyes saw only Jason, which led her to madly commit a series of evil deeds later, causing such a great tragedy. With Ares present this time, he certainly wouldn't allow his junior sister to suffer such a tragedy again. All right, without further ado, let's begin. Ares rolled up the scroll on the table and stood up. Just as he was looking for a place to start teaching Medea divine texts, he suddenly heard two soft gurgles. Ares turned his head and saw Medea blushing deeply, her head bowed, her hands tightly clenching her dress, not daring to meet his gaze. Hungry? Ares looked at her for 2 seconds, then asked. Medea's gaze shifted. After all, she was a princess, so she still had some modesty. Fortunately, at her age, she was still just a child, and the royal education had not yet deeply ingrained itself in her mind. So, she finally succumbed to her hunger and nodded gently, Alas, after all, she's just a normal human. Ares shook his head and said, Don't panic, your senior brother will figure something out for you. He spoke lightly, but in reality, he had no confidence. In his previous life, Ares had mostly stayed at home, and when he did work, he ate takeout. The only 3 cooking skills he knew were steaming white rice, making instant noodles, and boiling frozen food. Since coming to this world, Ares had been one of the 12 chief gods of Olympus, wielding immense power, with countless subordinate gods and servants to attend to his daily life. Furthermore, eating was not a necessary need for gods. Since Ares realized this was the moon world and started causing trouble, he had basically not eaten anything except for necessary banquets, fearing someone might poison his food. Besides, he wasn't accustomed to much of the food in Greece. As for the things he had misled Typhon with earlier, those were naturally just for fun. He had never tasted Typhon's cooking, so how would he know if the steak Typhon made according to his made-up recipes was delicious or terrible? Hecate, on the other hand, was even more engrossed, conducting magic experiments for several days without rest, let alone eating. As for asking other nearby deities or Hecate's nymphs, don't forget this is the underworld. The dead in the underworld don't need to eat, and the underworld gods and nymphs naturally don't have the habit of eating either. Therefore, Ares was stumped by the hungry Medea. As he led Medea out of the tree palace, he quietly contacted his teacher, Hecate. Teacher, do you know how to cook? Online and quite urgent. Cook. Hecate was probably busy with something. After Ares sent the message, she responded several seconds later, Cook what? Why do you suddenly want to cook? If you want to eat, go ask your followers for sacrifices. Don't you have many followers, I recall. It's not for me to eat, Ares said. It's Medea. She's human, unlike us. Medea. Oh, that's right, I almost forgot. Hecate thought for a moment and replied. Wait a moment, I'll come back and figure something out for you. A moment later, as Ares brought Medea to Hecate's garden, the moon goddess also returned. She walked along the path, carrying a piece of steak she had somehow acquired in one hand and a stack of papers in the other, frowning as she read them. Upon nearing her, Ares saw her expression and quickly asked, Teacher, do you have a plan? Ahem, rest assured. Seeing Medea's hopeful eyes, Hecate puffed out her chest forcefully, cleared her throat, and then said, There's nothing my great goddess Hecate cannot do. Perseus, get the pot and light the fire. Ares received the order and immediately used magic to dig a pit in the ground, then threw a ball of flame into it. He then took out the iron pot from Hecate's tree palace, which hadn't been used for who knows how many centuries, cleaned it, and placed it over the fire. Let me see. First, add some olive oil, then wait for the oil to heat up, then throw the meat in to fry. Hecate spoke and operated simultaneously. Just as everything was proceeding smoothly and orderly, the sharp-eyed Ares suddenly saw Hecate pour in a can of strange seasoning. The next moment, flames shot skyward, accompanied by a loud bang. The iron pot was directly blown into the sky by the massive explosion, shattering into dust. Chapter 138, Chapter 136 Hercules kills someone. Clap, 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 clap. After Heracles threw the heavy Nemean lion's corpse back to the ground, accompanied by a round of applause, Ares's divine power avatar naturally walked out from behind the tree. "I admire your bravery, brother. I shall reward you." As Ares spoke, he bent down and lifted the Nemean lion's claws, using them as blades to dissect its corpse. He skillfully peeled off a complete lion hide from the lion and then detached all 4 of its paws. Next, he used his divine power to directly blow out flames, using them as a furnace, and crafted the lion hide into a leather armor. He made the lion's head into a majestic helmet and fashioned 2 of the 4 lion claws into a pair of gauntlets, while the remaining 2 were made into leather boots. These pieces of equipment, while retaining their original functions, were reinforced by Ares using Hephaestus's smelting techniques and Hecate's magic, making them even more powerful than the originals. After the forging was complete, Ares presented these pieces of equipment to Heracles. The latter, of course, did not decline, expressing his thanks and also thanking all the gods of Olympus. This, of course, was the result of their prior agreement. Afterward, Ares casually mentioned to Heracles, "There's currently an athletic competition being held in Athens. If you're interested, you can stop by and take a look on your way back." "I understand." Heracles comprehended, lowering his head and saying, "Thank you for the reminder, god of war. Then I'll be going back." Ares patted Heracles' shoulder with satisfaction. "Perform well, my brother." With that, his divine power avatar returned to the sky. However, Ares did not go far, instead, he followed behind Heracles. Since Athena knew what Heracles' first task was, it was impossible for her not to guard against this. Heracles' journey to Athens would likely encounter many twists and turns. Although they certainly couldn't stop this great hero, they could slow him down. Sure enough, as Heracles was about to reach the outskirts of Athens, a fierce wind suddenly arose in the sky. Notos, god of the south wind, who had been thoroughly tormented by Ares, reappeared in the clouds, blowing winds towards the ground and causing a huge downpour to fall in Heracles' path. The heavy rain made the ground extremely muddy and difficult to traverse, forcing Heracles to somewhat impatiently take shelter in a cave. Seeing this, Ares silently circled behind Notos, god of the south wind. He gestured behind this poor deity, who was still wearing shackles as he came out to blow the wind, found a suitable angle, and then suddenly kicked him down from the clouds. Ouch! Notos, god of the south wind, was caught off guard and tumbled directly from the cloud. He only managed to turn his head and see a familiar golden flash disappear from the cloud where he had just been. Afterward, amidst a dizzying haze, he directly fell onto the muddy ground. He rolled several times in the mud and water, not knowing where he had ended up. When he finally stopped, Notos, covered in mud, was astonished to find himself inside a cave, and in front of him, a burly man wearing lion hide armor and a lion head helmet was sitting with his arms wrapped around his knees, staring directly at him. Seeing the burly man, Notos was stunned, but the other party stood up directly, reaching for the huge bronze club leaning nearby. He hoisted this human weapon onto his shoulder, then circled around, blocking the cave's only exit, and calmly asked, "Was it you who blocked my path? Wind and rain, what do you mean by blocking your path?" Hearing the burly man's question, Notos, god of the south wind, recovered his senses and sneered. He tidied his clothes, used his divine power to wash off the mud on his body, and then said to the burly man with disdain, "Move aside, mortal, I am Notos, the god of wind, fulfilling the oracle of the higher gods. I advise you not to try and block a god's path, otherwise." Since Zeus took the lead in messing around in the mortal world, the gods on Olympus followed suit, and there were also many demigods in the Greek world. However, the strongest of these demigods could only rival the weakest of the minor gods, while the weaker ones, apart from being extraordinary in certain aspects, were otherwise like mortals, such as Linus, Apollo's son, who was casually killed by Heracles with a lyre. Notus inwardly believed that the burly man before him was merely an ordinary demigod and could never be a match for a powerful minor god like himself. However, after he issued his threats and warnings, Heracles merely lowered his head, looking at him with a seemingly dazed expression. "What? You don't understand human speech? Are you perhaps an idiot?" Notus walked aggressively in front of Heracles and forcefully pushed Heracles's chest. However, the latter remained motionless, his body not even swaying. Normally, upon seeing Heracles's overwhelming physical strength, most people would understand the disparity in their combat power and would not dare to provoke Heracles easily. However, Notus, considering himself a deity, was accustomed to arrogance and did not regard these demigods and mortals. Seeing Heracles motionless, he felt insulted and then angrily raised his eyebrows, cursing. "You audacious mortal! How dare you offend a god? Let me teach you a lesson." With that, Notus rolled up his sleeves and walked towards Heracles, who was blocking the cave entrance. A moment later, Notus, bruised and swollen again, had his hands and feet bound by Heracles with a leather rope. Heracles tied his hands and feet together, then threaded a wooden stick through the gap between his hands and feet, lifting him up and carrying him on his back. At this moment, Notos, god of the south wind, looked exactly like a slave. "Mortal! You are desecrating a god." Even after being beaten by Heracles for a long time, Notos, god of the south wind, remained stubborn. With a thick tongue, he slurred his threats, "You will die a miserable death. I swear in the name of the father of the gods." "Ah!" Heracles casually slapped him and then stuffed a stone he picked up from the roadside into Notus's mouth, forcing him to shut up. Seeing this withered god, Heracles, who had been feeling depressed lately, couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. He patted Notos, god of the south wind's arm, and then said to him as Ares had instructed. "You said you came to block my path by divine decree. Then, in the name of my father, Zeus, I will seek an explanation from the gods. Athens is nearby, so why don't you come with me to Athena to judge who is right and who is wrong in this matter?" Chapter 139, Chapter 137 Athena's Backhand. Ares pinched the bridge of his nose helplessly after hearing what Heracles said. Then he said, "I remember I've been teaching you one thing since you came of age, patience." "Of course, I wouldn't dare forget my teacher's teachings," Heracles mumbled. "Then where is your patience?" Ares asked. "Linus is a demigod, and even though he's annoying, his crime isn't punishable by death. When he hit you, why didn't you think of enduring it?" "I tried, but I was so angry then. I've never been so angry, like I'd gone mad." Heracles looked at his palms worriedly. "And I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted to hit him with the lyre to warn him to stop touching me, but after I threw the lyre, he stopped moving. Isn't that right?" "The lyre was embedded in the wall," Ares sighed. "I've hit you plenty of times too. Why aren't you angry at me?" "That's only if I could beat you," Heracles muttered softly. "Enough, Heracles, listen carefully, I'll only say this once." Ares said to Heracles very seriously, "Rein in your temper, learn patience, control your emotions, otherwise, one day, you will regret it." "Oh!" Seeing how solemn Ares was, Heracles didn't dare to be negligent and quickly lowered his head in agreement. "Here, take this." After Ares finished speaking, he pulled out a pendant made of transparent crystal from his sleeve and placed it in Heracles's hand. "Keep it close to you. When you lose control in the future, it might help you." Heracles solemnly accepted the pendant and kept it close to him as Ares instructed. Afterward, Ares left, leaving Heracles to continue his self-reflection. 2 days later, Amphitryon prepared rich offerings and summoned Rhadamanthus, the judge, from the underworld to adjudicate Heracles's case. The just Rhadamanthus, after careful consideration, and Zeus's intimidation, decided to declare Heracles innocent, on the condition that Amphitryon would cede the throne of Thebes to Creon and become a general of the Mycenae kingdom himself. This was not a great loss, and Linus was a demigod after all, which was also Amphitryon's compensation to Apollo. However, after the judgment was delivered, Amphitryon still feared that Heracles would harm others again, so he decided to send Heracles to the countryside to herd cattle for him. Considering that Heracles's incident had already begun, Ares, while also teaching Medea, focused most of his energy here. He guided Heracles step by step, supervising his surroundings to prevent Athena and the Fates from causing trouble. Athena also seemed to know about this and, under Ares's supervision, no longer appeared by Heracles's side. However, Heracles was no ordinary person, he had a heroic spirit from childhood. While herding cattle in the countryside, he met an envoy sent by King Erginus of the Mycenae kingdom and learned that the Mycenae kingdom was imposing an unreasonable annual tribute on Thebes. So, as the liberator of all oppressed people, he quickly struck down these abusive envoys, then tied them up and sent them back to their king. This incident ignited the war between Thebes and the Mycenae kingdom. Creon, the new king of Thebes, was a coward and was already prepared to compromise with Erginus. However, he did not expect that Heracles, with Amphitryon's help, had mobilized a group of brave youths from Thebes. Ares, through his temple, provided them with a batch of excellent weapons and equipment from Sparta, and also freely gifted Heracles a giant bronze club. Thus, wielding these weapons, the invincible Heracles marched directly to the capital of the Mycenae kingdom and clubbed the tyrannical king Erginus to death. However, his adoptive father, Amphitryon, was also wounded in this battle. Although Ares helped him avert certain death, he could no longer be a general in this life. Ares sent him and his wife Alcmene to the rear of Thebes, where they were carefully looked after by his priests. The victorious Heracles, meanwhile, gained the favor of King Creon of Thebes. Probably fearing Heracles's great club, Creon married his daughter Megara to Heracles without a word upon seeing him. Facing injustice, returning victorious, and marrying a princess, the lives of most heroes at Heracles's stage would then be peaceful and prosperous. Heracles did indeed enjoy several years of prosperity in Thebes. He and Princess Megara, Creon's daughter, were deeply in love and had 3 children, leading a very happy life. However, at this very moment, Ares became vigilant. His divine power clone followed Heracles 24 hours a day using invisibility, monitoring Athena and the Fates, ready to deal with any divine intervention against Heracles. Even when Heracles was being intimate with his wife Megara, Ares was listening nearby, fearing that Heracles might suddenly go mad and strangle his wife. Even if the Fates and Athena used methods unknown to Ares, he would at least photograph the act to preserve future evidence. Thus, under Ares's protection, Heracles's 3 children slowly grew up into 3 rather adorable Iolaus and Shota. Goddess Athena, is what you're saying true? Inside the underworld, Rhadamanthus, who had just finished a day of judgment, looked seriously at the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of fate veiled in white gauze by the river Styx. Of course, it's all true. According to fate, Amphitryon was destined to die in this battle, and his wife, Alcmene, so beautiful that even Zeus coveted her, should have become your wife. However, Ares changed his fate, sparing him from death, and the beautiful Alcmene naturally did not fall into your hands. Standing by the river Styx, Athena smiled and pointed to the nearby river of oaths. I can swear by my divinity on the river Styx that not a single word I've spoken is a lie. Rhadamanthus. Just as Athena finished speaking, Atropos, the goddess of fate behind her, also spoke. Ares, who defied his own fate, is an unforgivable sinner, and Amphitryon, who violated his own fate, is also guilty. As a judge of the underworld, you have a responsibility to return fate to its original course. Well, Rhadamanthus? Athena asked. As the most just and impartial chief judge, are you willing to fulfill the mission we have given you? Hearing the 2 goddesses' questions, Rhadamanthus remained silent for a long time. Chapter 140, Chapter 138 Burning House. Ares's divine power avatar, who was watching over Heracles, suddenly sensed that the spell he had left on Amphitryon had been triggered. Did something happen to Amphitryon? Ares's heart was first startled, followed by a strong surge of anger. Amphitryon, having lost his fighting ability and his throne, should have no use for the gods. He could no longer complete any tasks for them, and killing him would bring no benefit to the gods. Ares sympathized with the honest man's plight and admired his character, which was why he intervened to save Amphitryon's life during his fated battle and sent him to the rear, allowing him to live as a rich man in Thebes and peacefully retire with Alcmene. But Ares never expected that his opponent, Athena, had no bottom line, even going so far as to eliminate a seemingly useless pawn like Amphitryon. He roughly guessed Athena's intention behind this action, but just like Ares's own scheme, Athena this time also used an overt plot. If Heracles were to know afterwards that Ares had abandoned his father, Amphitryon, he would surely bear a grudge against him. Moreover, from Ares's own moral standpoint, he could not stand by and watch Amphitryon die. So Ares could only grit his teeth. Seeing Heracles leave for a hunt with his bow and arrows, he quickly transformed into a streak of fire and rushed towards Amphitryon's room within Thebes. Just as Ares was rushing towards Thebes, Heracles, carrying the golden bow Apollo had given him and the quiver Hephaestus had gifted him, entered the nearby forest. These divine artifacts were wedding gifts from the gods to him and Megara when he accomplished the great feat of defeating the Mycenae kingdom. However, after marrying the princess, Heracles did not choose to remain in the royal city and inherit the throne. Fearing that he might go mad again and harm others, he still chose the reclusive life Amphitryon had arranged for him. And Megara, after marrying him, did not continue to live a pampered life like a princess in Thebes, but instead came with Heracles to the countryside of Thebes, living an idyllic pastoral life. Although in this era, humans in the Greek world could not yet be called the lords of all creation, in the age of gods in Greece, there were dangerous jungle swamps and barren mountains and treacherous waters everywhere, and these areas were filled with wild beasts and monsters that threatened human lives. The countryside of Thebes was, of course, no exception, but it also depended on who lived in that area. For ordinary people, losing the protection of sturdy city walls indeed made it easy to fall into danger, but for a humanoid powerhouse like Heracles, there were very few things in the entire Greek world that could threaten him. For him, the wild beasts and monsters scattered throughout the Theban countryside were, on the contrary, a very important food source. A typical meal in Heracles's home usually contained the meat of some fierce beast or monster, all hunted by Heracles from the forest. Initially, the fierce beasts living in this region did not know the strength of this robust man and mostly regarded him as prey. At that time, Heracles did not even need to track his prey, he would enter the forest, and wild beasts would essentially offer themselves up. But as such incidents happened more often, these animals gradually began to understand the difference in their positions on the food chain compared to Heracles. Therefore, now, Heracles cannot even enter the forest to hunt with his most convenient bronze club, but instead has to use a bow and arrow, and usually has to track for half a day using hunting skills learned from Chiron. However, this did not extinguish Heracles's passion for hunting in the slightest. He was a born warrior and hero. While he could do herding or farming as a job, when it came to what he truly loved, Heracles preferred passionate combat and hunting. Moreover, today he had also promised his children to hunt a bear or a wild boar for them to taste fresh meat. Heracles moved through the forest with great speed, startling birds and beasts. Soon, he locked onto his target by the footprints left on the ground, an abnormally large wild boar. Among the heroes of the Greek world, two figures were widely recognized for their superior hunting skills. One was Orion, Artemis's good companion and beloved, the demigod son of Poseidon. The other was also connected to Artemis, a devout follower of Artemis, the fastest legend on the ground in Greece, Atalanta. Of course, this exclusion also implicitly included Heracles, because Heracles was not only stronger than Orion but also faster than Atalanta. If Atalanta was the silver chariot of the Greek world, then Heracles was the platinum star among Greek heroes. Hunting a wild boar was naturally not difficult for him. After some tracking, Heracles successfully found the demonic boar lowering its head to drink by a small stream and easily and happily dispatched it with Apollo's golden bow. After shooting down this enormous wild boar, which was clearly a monster, Heracles walked over, intending to pull out the arrow that had deeply pierced the monster's vital spot, clean it, and put it back in his quiver. But at that moment, the seemingly dead monster suddenly leaped up and attacked Heracles violently. The demonic boar charged at Heracles. It was utterly useless. Heracles used exploding fist on the demonic boar. It was super effective. The demonic boar was defeated. Looking at the demonic boar, which he had exploded in the head with one punch and was slowly falling, Heracles shook his hand and continued to walk over. He had just taken a direct charge from the demonic boar, but he wasn't a weakling, so he only felt a slight bump and was unharmed. However, just as Heracles reached the demonic boar, he touched his chest and suddenly realized that the crystal pendant his teacher had given him, which was said to protect him, was suddenly gone. He searched the nearby forest area, turning it upside down, even dragging out two black bears hiding in a cave and forcibly inspecting them, but Heracles still could not find his crystal pendant. Finding nothing, Heracles could only carry his catch, feeling a bit lost, and walked towards home. Just as he left the woods, a beautiful blonde goddess suddenly emerged from a nearby bush. She gazed at Heracles retreating back from afar, then lowered her head to look at her palm. In her palm, the crystal pendant Heracles had lost lay quietly. Using such methods again and again. The goddess smiled slightly, then murmured to herself, "Ares, you truly look down on me." With that, her hand tightened, a golden light flashed, and then the crystal pendant in her palm shattered into dust. Aside from losing his pendant, this hunt was very successful. Even with the time spent searching, Heracles did not spend much time at all. When he emerged from the forest, Helios's sun chariot had not even traveled halfway. But just as Heracles reached the open field where he could see his home, he suddenly smelled a pungent odor of smoke. He looked up and was dismayed to see that his home was already ablaze. The smoke from the flames formed a distinct white line, rising straight into the sky. Megara! Children! Heracles quickly dropped his prey, then quickened his pace, rushing towards his burning home. Chapter 141, Chapter 139. Madness. Heracles burst into the room, which was filled with smoke and fire. The wooden house had already been completely ignited, and many of its structures had collapsed. The merciless flames licked at Heracles' body, attempting to completely engulf him, but Heracles, having completely shed his mortal coil, directly ignored the raging fires and collapsing pillars. Like a war machine, he smashed through walls and fallen debris with his shoulders, charging all the way to the innermost room where his wife and children were. Busting open the door, Heracles, however, did not see his wife, Megara, or their two children in the room. There were only 3 soldiers holding short swords and wearing helmets, standing in a pincer formation. As Heracles burst into the room, they turned their heads, looking at him in surprise. Heracles noticed the style of armor on these 3 soldiers. It was precisely that of the Mycenae kingdom soldiers he had dealt with before. Remnants of an enemy nation? Have you come to avenge your king? Heracles roared, "Where are my wife and children? Where have you taken them?" But these 3 Mycenae kingdom soldiers did not answer him. They merely tightened their grip on their swords, shouting slogans he couldn't understand, and advanced toward him. "You won't listen to me." Heracles' expression darkened. "Then don't blame me, soldiers of the enemy nation." He took 2 steps forward, and the 3 Mycenae kingdom soldiers immediately charged. The first soldier, leading the charge, had already gripped his short sword and thrust it at him. Heracles did not dodge or evade the blade. The short sword struck his smooth chest, producing a loud clang as if hitting a steel plate, and then broke into 2 pieces. Next, Heracles directly extended both hands and lifted the Mycenae kingdom soldier. He grabbed the soldier by the neck and leg, and with a gentle twist, a crack sound was heard. The Mycenae soldier's lumbar spine was snapped in half by Heracles with ease, like a piece of firewood. Thud. After killing the first soldier, Heracles gently tossed him aside and continued forward. At this moment, the second and third Mycenae kingdom soldiers also charged at him. With determination to die, they continued to fearlessly swing their blades at him. Heracles also raised his hand and delivered a slap. With a loud crash, his slap directly split the second Mycenae soldier, along with the blade in his hand, into 2 halves. Then, he took another step, grabbed the third soldier's blade, crushed it into 2 pieces, and then, gripping his neck, lifted him up. "Speak," Heracles asked coldly, "where are my wife and children?" However, upon hearing Heracles' interrogation, the Mycenae kingdom soldier merely kicked his legs incessantly, uttering a series of incomprehensible sounds. "You won't speak." Heracles gradually tightened his grip. "Then you shall die." Even battle-hardened soldiers were no different from infants in front of Heracles. As he gradually tightened his hand, the Mycenae soldier's neck quickly succumbed to the pressure, emitting a crisp sound. But during this process, the Mycenae kingdom soldier continued to repeat the word he didn't understand. It wasn't until Heracles completely crushed the soldier's neck that he finally, somewhat vaguely, understood the meaning of the word in the Mycenae soldier's mouth. He was shouting in the language of the Greek world, and the word was father. "Father, father!" Hearing that faint sound, a cold sweat suddenly broke out on Heracles' body. The scorching sensation vanished. The Mycenae soldier before his eyes blurred and distorted. Finally, as his vision cleared, Heracles saw where he was. He stood inside his wife and children's bedroom. There were no flames in this room, only the large hole he had made when he burst in. And the Mycenae soldier in his hand was his beloved daughter. Her body was now completely stiff, and blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. "Ah!" Heracles was so startled that his grip loosened, and his daughter fell to the ground. He turned around, and behind him, the 2 Mycenae kingdom soldiers who had died so tragically had transformed into his wife, Megara, and his eldest son. They too now lay in a pool of blood, and his body was covered in the blood of his wife and children. Standing amidst this tragic scene, Heracles' body slowly stiffened. Thud. Rhadamanthus stood in Amphitryon and Alcmene's home, surrounded by ghost fire, silently watching the old man, whose life and soul he had just stripped away, fall onto the room's floor. Then, he quietly turned around, looked at the beautiful woman beside him, whose face was filled with horror and anger, and said to her, "Rest assured, Alcmene, Amphitryon dies now because it is his destiny. Death is not your destiny, so I will not lay a hand on you. However, you are to become my wife from now on." "Rhadamanthus," Alcmene said angrily, "do you really think I will meekly obey the command of someone who killed my husband? Even if you are a god." "I don't care," Rhadamanthus said indifferently. "All of this is the arrangement of destiny. I don't care if you're happy or not, or if you'll love me in the future. I only need you to become my wife, and that is enough." "You wish?" Alcmene cursed. Rhadamanthus completely ignored her resistance and walked directly towards her. Alcmene drew a short sword, intending to defend herself. She was quite resolute. After all, Zeus deceiving her by taking on her husband's appearance had become a lifelong shadow for Alcmene, and she had secretly sworn never to betray Amphitryon again. However, Alcmene was merely a mortal. How could she resist Rhadamanthus, who had already become one of the underworld gods? Her blade couldn't even touch Rhadamanthus' body. After she fruitlessly swung her short sword several times and realized she couldn't harm the 3 judges, Alcmene prepared to commit suicide with her sword. At that moment, Rhadamanthus also grabbed her arm. "Come with me to the underworld." Rhadamanthus snatched Alcmene's short sword and was about to take her down into the earth, but just then, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his foot and quickly re-emerged from the ground. He looked around and found that the room had, at some unknown point, become filled with divine flames. These flames were as vibrant as blood, carrying a power that horrified him. Creak! The door creaked softly as it was pushed open from outside. Then, a robust, handsome man with fiery red hair walked in from beyond the door and stood in front of Rhadamanthus. Chapter 142, Chapter 140 I hate it most when people threaten me. Ares. Seeing this tall, strong, and handsome man, Rhadamanthus's expression remained unchanged, but a slight cold sweat broke out on his back. Although they were both Zeus's sons, a demigod like him, who was born from Zeus and immortal and only elevated to godhood after death, certainly couldn't compare to Ares, the legitimate son of the king of gods and the queen of heaven. Moreover, Ares was the god who most perfectly inherited Zeus's combat prowess, so his fighting strength was naturally self-evident. Therefore, when Rhadamanthus realized that Ares had completely sealed off the room, he gave up the idea of a direct confrontation and, pulling Alcmene's hand, said to Ares, "Ares, listen to me, Amphitrion's death was fate's arrangement. Even Zeus has no right to change it. I was merely following fate's arrangement, so don't blame me." Ares tilted his head and glanced at Rhadamanthus, but didn't speak. Instead, he turned around and firmly sealed the door behind him with divine power. Ares. Seeing Ares's actions, Rhadamanthus's eyelids twitched, and then he shouted, "What do you want to do? Are you really going to defy fate's arrangement?" As he spoke, Ares had finished closing and sealing the door, and without heeding any of his words, he walked towards him step by step. Rhadamanthus retreated a few steps and then yelled, "I am also Zeus's son, and a legitimate hell's judge. If you dare to touch me, Zeus, Hades, Hecate, none of them will let you off." As he spoke, Ares had already closed in on him. Seeing this, Rhadamanthus quickly pulled Alcmene, whom he was holding, in front of him, and then, grabbing her, he shouted, "Ares, if you dare to come any closer, I'll..." Bang! A fist wreathed in fiery red flames shot past Alcmene's cheek like a streak of fire, then heavily smashed into Rhadamanthus's face. The Rhadamanthus, who was not skilled in combat, fell directly to the ground after being hit in the face with this punch. Tears, snot, and blood streamed down his face, smearing into a mess. Ares supported Alcmene's shoulder, gently pushing her aside, then came before Rhadamanthus and, without a word, continued to clench his fist. Lightning flashed on his fist, but it wasn't Zeus's lightning, it was something much deeper. The power of magnetic field rotation at 100,000 horsepower, combined with magic, was completely concentrated by Ares onto his fist. He then used it as a weapon, forcefully striking Rhadamanthus's face with punch after punch. Amidst cracking sounds, the Rhadamanthus's facial bones were crushed, his nose bridge, teeth and eyeballs were all flattened, and eventually, his entire head collapsed. During this process, Rhadamanthus's body also continuously bounced up and down like a patient suffering an electric shock, until it finally became completely still. After smashing Rhadamanthus's head until it merged with the ground and was indistinguishable, Ares then reached into his body and extracted all of his divine authority and divine power as a hell's judge. Then, he straightened up, wiped the blood from his face and fists, and while running his hand through his slightly disheveled hair, he said with a slight gasp, "Damn it, the thing I hate most in my life is being threatened." Then, he turned around and looked at Alcmene, smiling at her, "Sister-in-law, don't worry, I don't hit women." Alcmene swallowed. Although she wasn't afraid of these gods, Ares's recent violent actions had still somewhat startled her. Ares ignored Heracles's mother. He held the orb of light formed by Rhadamanthus's divine authority and divine power and came to Rhadamanthus's corpse, squatting down to search carefully. Found it. After searching for a moment, Ares's eyes lit up. He then pulled out a grayish-white crystal from Rhadamanthus's body. Like Athena, he crushed this crystal, and then a stream of light shot out from the white crystal, transforming into Amphitryon. Alcmene watched this scene with both surprise and joy. Amphitryon had now returned to his youthful appearance. He still looked a bit bewildered, and only after noticing Ares and Alcmene beside him did he regain his senses, then quickly bowed to Ares. "Ares, thank you for your help." Ares waved his hand, then sighed, "What's there to thank? I was still a step late. You're already dead now." Amphitryon lowered his head and looked at his hands. At the edges of his body's outline, a faint glow was vaguely visible. He had now become a ghost. Upon realizing this fact, he shook his head and then said to Ares, "I am already very grateful that you could rescue my soul from Rhadamanthus's shackles. Life and death are separate." Ares said after glancing at Alcmene and Amphitryon, "Even I cannot let you remain in the mortal world, Amphitryon, you understand, right?" Amphitryon nodded to Ares, then turned to his wife and said, "Alcmene, I'm truly sorry for not being able to give you a happy life this lifetime. After I'm gone, find a good man and remarry." "No." Alcmene said tearfully, "I want to go with you too." "You're truly foolish." Amphitryon shook his head, "Even if you die and we go to hell, we will still face judgment. I killed so many people, will the hell's judge truly sentence me to the same place as you? But I... All right, why are you two making such a big deal, as if it's a parting of life and death?" "Oh, it really is a parting of life and death, never mind then." Ares interrupted Amphitryon and Alcmene's touching conversation. He looked at Amphitryon and said to him, "I have a way for you two to stay together. Do you agree?" "What way?" Hearing Ares's words, Amphitryon and Alcmene turned their heads together and asked. "I'll explain the method in detail when we get to hell. Come, first record a video with me to show that I haven't threatened or deceived you," Ares said, while pulling out a crystal with a camera function from his person. A moment later, within Hecate's garden in hell, Amphitryon, now wearing a heavy iron helmet that completely obscured his face, looked at his appearance somewhat nervously, then cautiously asked the two great gods standing before him. "Great Hecate, esteemed Ares, is this truly acceptable for me?" "Yes, there are no issues with the containment of divinity, divine power, or divine authority. My research conclusions are indeed perfect." Hecate nodded with satisfaction, then exchanged a smiling glance with Ares. Ares then turned to him and said, It feels good. From now on, you are one of the hell's judges, Rhadamanthus, Zeus's son." Chapter 143, Chapter 141. "I won't act anymore. I'm going to reveal my cards." After arranging Amphitryon and Alcmene, leaving behind a stack of action guidelines, and entrusting the couple to the great regent of the underworld, Hecate, this divine avatar of Ares hastily departed the underworld. On the other side of Thebes, there was a youth in desperate straits, waiting for him to comfort and guide. Ares quickly arrived before Heracles' residence. Upon seeing the huge hole in the house's wall, Ares realized he was already too late. However, he had roughly anticipated such a result when he left to help Amphitryon and Alcmene, so while there was some regret, it wasn't a surprise. Ares first stood outside Heracles' home, transforming himself into Heracles' mentor, the elderly priest of Thebes, before stepping into Heracles' house. The hero's home was in disarray, as if a high-speed truck had crashed directly from outside the house all the way into the inner bedroom. All the walls along this straight line, from the outer wall to the inner bedroom, had huge holes smashed through them. It was clear that Heracles must have been in some kind of hallucination at the time, rushing into his home in extreme anxiety. As Ares entered the house, he also sensed the crystal pendant he had given to Heracles earlier. Sure enough, his connection to the crystal pendant had disappeared, indicating that Heracles' pendant had been lost or destroyed for some reason. Fortunately, ever since the ornament he gave to Medusa was crushed by Athena last time, Ares had left a contingency on that crystal pendant. Therefore, even if the crystal pendant was destroyed, Ares was not worried about not being able to catch Athena red-handed. He continued forward, following the large hole smashed by Heracles, all the way into the bedroom. In this dilapidated bedroom, Ares saw Heracles. At this moment, the great hero of Thebes was kneeling blankly in the center of the bedroom, staring straight ahead. In front of him, his wife Megara and their 2 children lay quietly in a pool of blood, long since lifeless. Looking at Heracles at this moment, Ares sighed, his anger towards Athena, the Fates, and Gaia intensifying. Leaning on the priest's long staff, he came behind Heracles, stood silently for a moment, and then spoke. Heracles. Hearing his voice, Heracles turned his head blankly. After staring straight at Ares for a moment with those empty eyes, hot tears suddenly welled up. Teacher. He choked, trying not to cry out loud, and said to Ares. I still couldn't control myself. I actually committed such a mistake. That's not your fault. Ares patted his shoulder, then asked. The crystal I gave you, you lost it, didn't you? Heracles nodded, tears streaming down his face. It was knocked off by a wild boar while I was hunting today. Then the matter is clear, Ares said. You've been set up again. Upon hearing Ares's words, Heracles stood up. He lowered his head and glanced at the bodies of his wife and children, then clenched his fists and asked Ares in a voice filled with rage. Who is plotting against me? If you knew, what would you do? Ares asked. Heracles did not answer, merely glancing at the large bronze club he kept in the bedroom. His actions clearly conveyed his meaning. He would use this great club, gifted by Ares, to smash the skull of the one who plotted against him. I can tell you, but you must promise me that this time, you will follow my teachings, Ares stated his condition. The person plotting behind the scenes is not someone you can handle right now. For your own safety, you must endure. Heracles clenched his fists and knelt on the ground. Then, he took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and nodded, I understand, teacher. I swear by the river Styx, this time, I will definitely restrain my anger. All right then. Ares said, standing up and walking into the living room outside the bedroom. He glanced out the window, and after confirming no one was around, he carefully walked back into the bedroom. Heracles would never go mad and kill for no reason. There must be Athena and the Fates behind her manipulating this. After all, the man who would appear in the future also killed his most beloved relatives in a fit of madness. This is considered a traditional art of the Greek gods. And this killing also indicated that the great and tragic journey of destiny belonging to the hero Heracles was about to begin. Ares found it difficult to interfere with Heracles' destiny, because from the very beginning, embarking on this arduous journey of atonement was actually Heracles' own choice. Given Heracles' current mental state, if he were to force Heracles not to take this difficult path of atonement, it would instead be helping Athena. Heracles' temper was quite stubborn. If Ares really forced him, this fellow might just stubbornly go against Ares, and then, he might directly defect to Athena's side. However, no matter how clever Athena and the Fates' schemes were, they were ultimately underhanded tricks. Ares also had a trump card against them, which was his stance and purpose. His current stance has always been on the side of Argo heroes and humans, and his purpose has always been to help himself and humanity liberate from the planetary suppressive force Gaia and its lackey gods. Therefore, Athena cannot openly tell the Argo heroes her purpose, but he can confide in these Argo heroes and basically tell them anything. Doing so would certainly be more popular than Athena manipulating schemes from behind the scenes, silently guiding the Argo heroes like puppets on strings. And now, facing Heracles, whose arduous destiny was about to begin, Ares also decided, he would stop acting and lay his cards on the table with this old brother. Using divine power and mental power to perceive and confirm that there were no divine power, magic power, or other reactions within a 500-mile radius, he beckoned Heracles to stand beside him. Then, Ares reached out and pressed Heracles' shoulder, and with the war god's divine power, he created several boundaries, then pulled Heracles into a space similar to a unique boundary. Heracles suddenly saw a raging sea of fire rushing towards him in his vision. The scorching sensation from the flames made him instinctively raise his arms to shield his face. When the scorching sensation around him receded, the young great hero was astonished to find himself in a magnificent divine palace. And his teacher, the elderly priest of Thebes, was already calmly seated on the divine throne within the divine palace, gazing at him with tranquil eyes. "Teacher, who exactly are you?" Heracles, sensing something amiss, hastily asked Ares. "I am your teacher, Heracles, I am the priest of Thebes, an elder who watched you grow up," Ares said, and suddenly, crimson flames ignited on his body. The color of these flames was like blood, burning from the left side of his body to the right. During this process, his original posture and appearance burned into ashes like a piece of paper, and then, beneath his original appearance, as the flames passed, the figure of a handsome and imposing man was revealed. After this figure was fully revealed before Heracles, Ares continued, using his now changed voice, "But I also have another identity, Heracles. I am your half-brother, I am the guardian of Olympus, the destroyer of city-states, the overseer of war. I made here and nurse you in the wilderness, granted you miracles, and brought you back to your parents. My name is war god, Ares." Heracles gave a wry smile, then, with a hint of helplessness, humbly knelt on one knee. "I never imagined that even my teacher was a deity." Chapter 144, Chapter 142. "You don't have to kneel to me, my brother." Ares used his divine power to lift Heracles and then said to him, "Neither by blood nor by status are you inferior to me, so why would you kneel to me? And actually, your other teacher, Chiron, is also a god. He is the son of the former god King Kratos and Philyra, so gods are not rare." "No, I don't kneel to you because you are a god," Heracles replied. "I am willing to kneel to you and obey your commands because you are the teacher who taught me how to be a human being." "That's true," Ares nodded. "Then I order you to sit down." "All right, hurry up and sit down, I have something important to tell you." At Ares's request, Heracles obediently sat cross-legged on the ground and listened attentively. "The crystal pendant I gave you before was not something you intentionally abandoned. Both the wild boar that crashed into you and today's tragedy were actually plots premeditated by certain goddesses. They made that pendant move away from you, so it could no longer protect your mind, and then they manipulated your mind." As Ares spoke, he spread out his palm. "Take a look at this first." In his palm was a crystal. When Ares infused his magic into it, Heracles immediately saw the scene that appeared before his eyes. It was in front of a royal palace late at night, a royal palace he was very familiar with, the Thebes royal palace where he grew up and lived during the time Amphitryon was still the king of Thebes. Moreover, he also saw his foster father, much younger than he was now, in the image. Soon after the scene began, a beautiful goddess silently appeared in front of the royal palace. She wore a long dress, a beautiful helmet, and had golden hair like gold. An owl was circling above her head. It was Athena, the goddess of wisdom, one of the most widely worshipped goddesses in Greece today. After Athena arrived in front of the Thebes royal palace, she directly extended her finger and pointed at the royal palace. Immediately, two venomous pythons suddenly darted out from the nearby wilderness and entered the royal palace. "What is this?" Before Heracles could finish being surprised by this, the scene before him suddenly changed. He saw that after he was struck by the demonic boar in the forest, the crystal pendant seemed to fall into water, directly dropping into the ground beneath his feet. It passed through layers of bizarre imaginary space and finally landed on a fair hand. The camera shifted, revealing the owner of the fair arm. It was still the beautiful goddess Athena with golden hair and bright eyes, standing there. She smiled and crushed the crystal pendant in her hand, then raised her scepter and gently drew a circle towards Heracles' retreating back. "So," Heracles asked, suppressing his anger after watching these two video clips, "was it the goddess Athena who plotted against me?" "And the fates," Ares said, continuing to tap the recording crystal in his palm. "They did more than just that. There's a latest record here, I'll show it to you." By the Styx River, the newly appointed Rhadamanthus was strolling and resting by the river. Earlier, just as Ares rushed to Heracles' side, Hecate also brought Rhadamanthus, one of the three judges of the underworld, to Hades' palace. When they returned to the palace, they happened to see the other two judges, Aeacus and Minos, waiting anxiously in the palace. With the assistance of Hecate, the regent of the underworld, Rhadamanthus successfully integrated into the group of the three judges according to the Rhadamanthus behavior guide given to him by Ares. Recalling his recent experience, Rhadamanthus grew even more respectful of Ares, the god of war. Both Aeacus' and Minos' actions and questions had been completely predicted by the god of war, and his responses, based on Ares' guide, did not arouse any suspicion from his two colleagues. After temporarily experiencing the judgment work of the three judges, Rhadamanthus also followed Ares' instructions and took advantage of the rest time to stroll along the River of Oaths. As he walked along the river for a while, he suddenly heard a woman's soft laugh. Rhadamanthus turned towards the laugh and then saw the goddess by the river, dressed in a long gown, with golden hair and bright eyes, and an owl circling above her head, as well as a woman standing beside her, wearing a white veil and a hooded robe. "Athena." Rhadamanthus nodded slightly to the goddess as Ares had instructed him. "Amphitryon is dead." After speaking, Rhadamanthus was also a bit nervous. Although according to Hecate's prediction, both he and Rhadamanthus were already dead, and the fates no longer held their threads of destiny, even if Ares completely annihilated Rhadamanthus, Hecate could easily conceal it with a bit of trickery. Nevertheless, there was still a risk of being discovered. Fortunately, Athena and the mysterious woman beside her did not seem to detect Rhadamanthus' lie. Upon hearing Rhadamanthus' words, Athena nodded in satisfaction. "I already know, Rhadamanthus, you are indeed just and selfless. Amphitryon's thread of destiny has been severed, and I have already reported this to Zeus, who highly praised your actions." "I'm not interested in such matters," Rhadamanthus said coldly, imitating the original Rhadamanthus's tone. "It was merely maintaining the course of destiny." You did well." The mysterious woman behind Athena also smiled upon hearing this. "It would be great if everyone in the world were as sensible as you. Alcmene is a gift from destiny to you. Enjoy her well, this woman is a beauty who can even charm Zeus." "I'm not interested in that aspect," Rhadamanthus waved his hand. "Leave, this is the underworld after all, not your domain, and I should go to work." "Hehe, then I'll be leaving first," Athena said to Rhadamanthus. "Rhadamanthus, it was a pleasure cooperating with you." With that, the two goddesses turned and left, their figures gradually disappearing at the edge of the Styx River. After seeing the two goddesses' figures vanish, Rhadamanthus also gently raised his hand, tapped his left eye, and softly asked, "Did you see that, god of war?" Chapter 145, Chapter 143 I am always with you. "I see, Amphitryon, you've worked hard. We'll be in touch later," Ares said, turning off the image Amphitryon had sent, then looked at Heracles, whose face was twisted in rage. "Are you all right?" he asked. Heracles' fury was even stronger now. In the recordings Ares had just shown him, Athena and the Fates had treated his birth mother, Alcmene, as if she were a toy, laughing as they did so. Heracles found this utterly unbearable. Hearing Ares' words, he struggled to suppress the anger that was about to erupt, then asked, "So, all the misfortunes I've suffered in my life were caused by Athena and the Fates behind the scenes?" "You could say that," Ares nodded. "But you can't deal with them yet. Forget the three goddesses, you can't even get past Athena. Heracles asked with a grim face, Teacher, shouldn't you gods be our protectors? Protectors? The proper Olympian gods have never considered humans as objects of protection. To them, humans are their property, no different from their cattle and livestock, and also tools for their venting and props to achieve their goals, Ares sneered. Be glad, Heracles, that you have a god-king for a father, and that you met me first. Otherwise, no one could say what you'd be like now. Seeing Heracles' silence, Ares continued, You'd best prepare yourself mentally. I will now tell you everything, the causes and effects, and the reason Athena targeted you. After Heracles was mentally prepared, Ares then told him everything, from his own intervention in human affairs during the Silver Age to Heracles' future destiny. Of course, he still held back a lot. After all, Heracles didn't need to know too much about the matters between him and Hecate. However, everything Heracles should know, including Ares' current objectives, he told him in meticulous detail. After listening to Ares' words, Heracles fell into a long silence. After a long while, he finally asked with difficulty, Why? Why are the fates and the goddess of wisdom so unfair to me? Did I ever profane or offend them when I wasn't paying attention? No, they target you simply because it is your destiny. Ares rose from his divine throne and came to Heracles' side. He stretched out a finger and drew a line of fire in mid-air. From the perspective of the planet's inhibitory force, the trajectory of destiny is predetermined, just as this world beneath our feet will one day meet its end. Gaia has accepted its destiny, and therefore it hopes that we, the beings nurtured on it, will also follow our destinies. This destiny has been established. The destinies of humans in many parallel worlds converge, weaving together into a pan-human history that appears on the fates-weaving loom. Gaia and the three goddesses want us to obey it. So, my life script was already written before I was even born. Heracles looked at his palms, a mix of tears and laughter on his face. How ironic! However, after a moment's pause, he asked again, But teacher, you telling me these things isn't just to make me despondent, is it? At least I didn't teach you for nothing, Ares chuckled and continued, As I said before, everything on this planet is a puppet under predetermined destiny. Even a god-king as strong as Zeus is powerless before the inhibitory force and destiny. But destiny is not absolute. Although the number of parallel worlds is limited, it also means that multiple possibilities exist simultaneously in different timelines. It's very possible that in some timelines, you and I are both beautiful old women, and this means that destiny is not absolute. I don't want to be a puppet manipulated by the threads of destiny, and I don't want to die like this, ushering in the end of the gods. He clenched his fists, raised his head, and continued, So I will resist destiny. While ensuring the stable development of human history, I will change my tragic future, our tragic future. I will end this divine age. Even Heracles couldn't help but twitch an eyelid when he heard Ares' bold statement. How about it? Ares extended his hand to the astonished Heracles. Life is short, want to join me for a grand venture, brother? Heracles pondered for a moment, then asked, If I join you, can I avenge Megara and the children? Of course, Ares laughed heartily. If we win, we'll ascend Olympus, seize Zeus's throne, and gradually drive out the gods' influence among mortals. Then, Athena and the three goddesses, what can they do, no matter how you deal with them? Good. Heracles nodded, Then I'll follow your arrangements, teacher. But if you dare to deceive me, then I'll cut off my own head and give it to you to play with, Ares immediately replied. In the independent space created by the god of war, the two swore an oath in the name of the Styx River, the River of Oaths, forming the firmest alliance. Afterward, Ares roughly informed Heracles of the subsequent battle strategy. The two discussed for a while and agreed on a method of contact. Ares then transformed back into his original Thebes priest appearance and lifted the spatial blockade used for their secret talk. Ares helped Heracles bury his wife and 2 children, building small tombs for the 3 behind the house and placing a copper coin in each of their mouths for Charon's fairy fair. "Don't worry, your father is also a judge now," Ares said, patting Heracles' shoulder as they stood before the 3 tombs. "He recognizes your wife and children. They will surely go to Elysium to enjoy happiness." Heracles nodded. "Where will you go next?" Ares asked again. "Are you still planning to exile yourself and then go to your brother, Eurystheus, to undertake his 12 labors?" "Yes." Heracles looked towards the horizon and said in a muffled voice, "Teacher, I think what you just said is right. Destiny or not, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that this is a choice I made according to my own will." "Then I wish you a smooth journey," Ares said with a smile, waving his hand. "Remember, I am always with you on your journey." Chapter 146, Chapter 144 Make her happy. The "I'm always with you" that Ares spoke of was not a lie other gods used to deceive their followers. In fact, during Heracles' journey, his alternate accounts truly followed him every step of the way. Sometimes, he was a fish swimming in the river when Heracles drank water, sometimes, he was an insect resting on a leaf beside Heracles as he slept. And when Heracles met his brother Eurystheus and was tormented by this king who inherited the throne of Mycenae, Ares transformed into a bird, watching them from a branch outside the palace. In the original Greek mythology, Eurystheus tormented his brother Heracles because he was a follower of Hera and acted on her orders. However, now that Hera would no longer harm Heracles, Eurystheus became the proxy for Athena and the 3 goddesses among humans. They appeared to be using Eurystheus to deal with Heracles, but in reality, they were using this mortal king to steer the myth of the mighty god back onto its original track. The first task Eurystheus gave was also the same as in the original myth. He told Heracles to deal with the Nemean lion. This monstrous beast lived in the great forest between Nemea and Cleone in Argolis, Peloponnese. Its hide was impenetrable, and mortal weapons could not harm it at all. Later, after Heracles obtained the hide of this giant lion, it even transformed into a noble phantasm capable of negating human reason and rejecting all tools from human civilization. The living Nemean lion also possessed such an ability. In the human world, only its own sharp claws and teeth could pierce its hide. There are legends that say it was the offspring of Typhon, the father of all demons, and the monster Echidna, making it a sibling to monsters like Hydra and Cerberus, who could threaten the gods. Others say it was a moon beast that fell from the moon. In any case, this was clearly a magical beast that humans could not deal with. Even the demigod Argo heroes would likely just be serving as food if they went. However, after hearing this, Heracles merely accepted the task silently, then carried the giant bronze club Ares had given him and headed towards the region where the beast lived. Ares sent one of his clones to follow him, mainly to guard against Athena and the 3 goddesses causing trouble again, and then he shifted his attention back to the underworld. His junior sister Medea was no longer in the underworld. Some time ago, she felt she had learned enough, and her father also began to miss his daughter, hoping she could return to the kingdom to be with the king and her brother. Thus, Hecate sent her back. After Medea left, Ares still felt quite lonely. It was like a little dog that had been kept for a long time was forced to be sent away. Not seeing the figure of the single ponytail girl practicing martial arts or magic in the garden made it feel like something was missing. After all, although Medea was nominally a disciple of Hecate, it was Ares, her senior brother, who truly spent most of the time guiding her. Hecate, as Medea's true teacher, was relatively carefree. After all, she spent most of her time tinkering in her magic workshop, and the one she spent the most time with was Ares. As long as Ares's main body was still in the underworld, for her, life was no different from before. Therefore, Ares, feeling bored on one hand and preparing to take the initiative on the other, also left the underworld, operating his alternate account, Perseus. Like Medea, before leaving, he specifically went to Hecate to ask for a going-out gift. Of course, this going out gift was actually a noble phantasm he made for himself. It mainly needed Hecate to leave her mark on it so he could identify himself later. Then, he sent his Perseus clone back to the human world. Upon hearing that Ares was preparing to mess with Athena's mind, Hecate temporarily stopped her work and rushed home to watch the show. The two watched the live broadcast from Perseus's side in the garden, while Ares, controlling Perseus from a first-person perspective, rushed towards the nearest human city-state. Seeing his actions, Hecate asked, "How are you going to disgust Athena?" "That's simple," Ares chuckled. "Disgusting her, I'm good at it. Perseus was originally Athena's biggest simp in human history, so I'll play a simp who will stop at nothing to simp for her. Watch me simp like crazy, simp until she gets an AJO face, it'll be so satisfying for her." "You haven't even been in a relationship, have you? Do you even know how to be a simp?" Hecate asked curiously. "Why wouldn't I? It's so simple." Ares coughed twice, then looked at Hecate with deep affection and said to her, "Are you there, Hecate? Are you in a bad mood today, ignoring me?" "All right, ignoring me is fine too, I won't bother you. You rest well, drink more hot water." "What? That little bitch Athena provoked you? Don't be afraid, I'll go beat her up to vent your anger." Hecate opened her mouth speechlessly and asked, "Where did you learn all this stuff?" "This is a skill that every man who longs for love but cannot attain it learns instinctively. If one doesn't truly love, who would be willing to be a simp?" Ares stroked his chin, composed his expression, and then asked, "How does it feel?" "Don't even mention it," Hecate smacked her lips and replied, "Seeing your usually arrogant disciple act so humble, it actually feels quite good." "Humph, good is right," Ares said, crossing his arms. "Watch me simp for her while making her an enemy of the world." As he spoke, Ares had already brought his Perseus alternate account into a human city-state. Upon asking, he found out that he had coincidentally arrived in the Peloponnese region, where the Nemean lion and Heracles were nearby. If he remembered correctly, Athens was also close by. Ares lowered his head and thought for a moment, quickly coming up with a plan. In the original Greek mythology, Perseus's rise to fame was due to his mother, Danae. After Danae was forcibly coupled with Zeus, the fearful king Acrisius of Argos placed her in a chest and cast her into the sea. After a period of drifting, Danae arrived at the island of Seriphos, which was ruled by two brothers. After rescuing Danae, the elder brother, Polydex, became enamored with this beautiful princess. In his eyes, the young Perseus was a burden. Therefore, to prevent Perseus from spoiling his good fortune with Danae, Polydex, at a banquet, proposed to the young Perseus that he desired the head of the Gorgon. It was also because of this task that Perseus embarked on his journey, received help from the gods, and eventually completed a series of heroic deeds, becoming a famous hero in Greek mythology. However, now Danae had been taken in by Ares to Sparta, where she also met her beloved, married, had children, and lived an ordinary and happy life. Polydex of Seriphos naturally had no connection with them, Danae had not even been there. But Ares was not afraid. Judging by the patterns of the three goddesses' actions he had observed twice, he believed that as long as he bore the title of Zeus's son, Perseus, these things would eventually fall upon him. So he set off, heading towards the nearby city-state of Athens. Chapter 147, Chapter 145 Poseidon tried to do something wrong. In the Greek world, athletic competitions were a very popular activity. Thanks to the Olympus gods who enjoyed a good show, a form of athletic games flourished in Olympia, where the statue of Zeus stood. Initially, these games were rituals led by priests to commemorate the gods, but they have now developed into a grand event enjoyed by everyone, from gods to mortals, throughout the Greek world. Apart from Olympia, its place of origin, other city-states in the Greek world gradually built huge arenas and began to host various activities independently to attract people and worship their city-states' guardian gods. Besides slaying monsters and defeating enemy nations in war, athletic activities also gradually became a way for Argo heroes of the Greek world to gain renown. Currently, in the Greek world, apart from the Olympia Games, the most flourishing place for athletic activities is Athens. It is said that within Athens, there are comprehensive combat competitions no less significant than those in Delphi, protected by Apollo. If a victor performs exceptionally, they might even receive the personal blessing of Athena. Ares intended to use this combat competition in Athens to establish the reputation of Perseus. He entered Athens, and after some inquiries, learned that a competition was about to begin soon. So, Ares went to the venue, registered under the name Perseus, and then temporarily remained in Athens, awaiting the start of the competition. However, while he was strolling, he suddenly noticed a figure in the marketplace. This person was a man with a long black beard and long hair flowing down his back, wearing a sea blue robe. He was indeed heroic in appearance. Mortals who didn't know might mistake him for a king or noble from a nearby city-state, but Ares saw the strong divine aura that could not be dispersed from him. Sea King Poseidon, this man was clearly a disguise of his avatar. The moment Ares recognized him, his heart tightened. Since he was tricked by him last time and Poseidon and Zeus completely broke off relations, the gods had not seen Poseidon anywhere else for a long time. Now, this Sea King, who had been self-isolating in his golden palace in the sea, suddenly came to Athena's territory, his great enemy, in the form of an avatar. There was only one reason Ares could think of for this. Even though she often covered her face with a hood and avoided crowds, Medusa, as a priestess of Athena, was still targeted by Poseidon. No, it should be said that it was highly probable that Athena and the three goddesses betrayed her to Poseidon, as this was also Medusa's fate. Seeing this situation, Ares naturally wanted to contend, but his divine power avatar didn't seem to have a particularly reliable reason to be here, and Perseus's small account couldn't possibly contend with the Sea King. Fortunately, in the nearby Peloponnese region, there was a great hero who could rival the Sea King, and if he came, Ares would have an excuse to descend there. Thinking of this, Perseus glanced in a certain direction outside Athens, then withdrew his gaze, fixed it on Poseidon's avatar, and quietly followed him. During Perseus's stay in Athens, Ares's other avatar watched Heracles successfully find the Nemean lion near the Nemean plain in the Peloponnese region. When Heracles found it, the Nemean lion was devouring an unfortunate traveler in its lair. Halfway through its meal, it looked up and saw a heavily armored, fully armed strong man suddenly entering its lair entrance. Its territory invaded, the Nemean lion immediately dropped the human corpse it hadn't finished gnawing on, roared, stood up, and pounced towards Heracles. Heracles, in turn, drew his bow and arrow, calmly engaging it in battle. Although consistently known for his bravery in mythology, the wisdom of Heracles, the mighty god, should not be underestimated. This also greatly aided him in battle. After 2 rounds of probing engagement, Heracles quickly understood the characteristics of this Nemean lion and realized why this lion had been entrenched in this area for many years, harassing surrounding city-states, yet no one had come to kill or drive it away. To summarize the Nemean lion's characteristics in one sentence, it is incredibly tough while also dealing high damage. Its lion hide is impervious to swords and blades, even the bronze club Ares gave him, crafted with the highest Spartan smelting technology, could not harm the Nemean lion in the slightest. Yet, this beast's sharp claws could cut through anything. The Spartan armor Ares gifted him was like paper in front of the lion's claws, making it incredibly troublesome. Fortunately, it did not inherit the same magical abilities as its siblings from Typhon and Echidna, otherwise, even many gods might not be a match for this giant lion. After determining the characteristics of this lion, Heracles' mind raced, and he quickly devised a way to deal with it: equip armor-piercing gear, then control it and suppress it directly. He pushed the giant lion back into its lair, then used a huge rock he had prepared beforehand to block the entrance. While the Nemean lion was destroying the rock, trying to come out and fight him, Heracles began preparing to kill it. He first took off his bow and arrows and armor, throwing them on the ground. The bow and arrows couldn't pierce its defense anyway, and wearing the armor was like wearing a layer of paper, it was better not to wear it for more agile movement. Then, Heracles selected a tree of suitable thickness outside the giant lion's lair, broke it, and fashioned it into a wooden club that would appear to be a pillar to an ordinary person, holding it in his hand. This wooden club was not a creation of human civilization but a tree born from nature. Therefore, what the bronze club could not penetrate the thick lion hide this giant club could achieve. After completing these preparations, Heracles stood guard at the lair entrance, waiting for the giant lion to break through the huge rock blocking the entrance. Although not an ordinary creature itself, the Nemean lion was a monster that only attacked physically. Therefore, a huge rock that could be pulverized by a fireball spat out by Cerberus, the hellhound, took the Nemean lion a long time to dig through. When its claws shattered the last piece of bedrock and it saw the light of day again, the sunlight before it was suddenly obscured by a tall shadow. Heracles, bare-chested and displaying sculptural muscles, raised the huge wooden club high. Before the Nemean lion could react, he mustered all his strength and savagely smashed it onto the lion's head. With a loud bang, the Nemean lion's head was struck down like by a crane's heavy hammer, slamming violently onto the ground and sending out a circle of air shockwaves. The wooden club in Heracles's hand also couldn't withstand such abuse, it cracked and shattered into splinters with that single blow. However, after delivering this heavy blow, Heracles successfully achieved his goal. As the wooden club shattered, the Nemean lion also collapsed. Although this completely natural and unpolluted wooden club, 100% sourced from the natural environment, could not directly penetrate its thick lion hide to kill it, the impact force of the club had completely penetrated its natural armor, piercing into its skull and shaking its entire brain. The Nemean lion reeled, seeing stars, completely disoriented. Heracles, seizing the opportunity, agilely moved behind it, extended his strong arms, and directly clamped the Nemean lion's neck. Heracles applied a powerful chokehold to the Nemean lion. The effect was outstanding, the Nemean lion suffocated. Heracles roared, his arm muscles bulging, and with a sudden burst of strength, he actually lifted the giant lion, which must have weighed several tons, directly into the air. The Nemean lion desperately kicked its limbs, but in terms of pure strength, it was already a notch weaker than Heracles, that freak among the fourth-generation divine children. Moreover, after Heracles throttled its throat, he also cut off its intake of magic and oxygen. The lion's struggles became increasingly weak, and finally, Heracles tightened his arms again. With a snap, the Nemean lion's neck was twisted clean off by him. Chapter 148, Chapter 146 Notos was beaten again. Clap, 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 clap. After Heracles threw the heavy Nemean lion's corpse back to the ground, accompanied by a round of applause, Ares's divine power avatar naturally walked out from behind the tree. I admire your bravery, brother. I shall reward you. As Ares spoke, he bent down and lifted the Nemean lion's claws, using them as blades to dissect its corpse. He skillfully peeled off a complete lion hide from the lion and then detached all four of its paws. Next, he used his divine power to directly blow out flames, using them as a furnace, and crafted the lion hide into a leather armor. He made the lion's head into a majestic helmet and fashioned 2 of the 4 lion claws into a pair of gauntlets, while the remaining 2 were made into leather boots. These pieces of equipment, while retaining their original functions, were reinforced by Ares using Hephaestus's smelting techniques and Hecate's magic, making them even more powerful than the originals. After the forging was complete, Ares presented these pieces of equipment to Heracles. The latter, of course, did not decline, expressing his thanks and also thanking all the gods of Olympus. This, of course, was the result of their prior agreement. Afterward, Ares casually mentioned to Heracles, "There's currently an athletic competition being held in Athens. If you're interested, you can stop by and take a look on your way back." "I understand. Heracles comprehended, lowering his head and saying, "Thank you for the reminder, god of war. Then I'll be going back." Ares patted Heracles' shoulder with satisfaction. "Perform well, my brother." With that, his divine power avatar returned to the sky. However, Ares did not go far. Instead, he followed behind Heracles. Since Athena knew what Heracles' first task was, it was impossible for her not to guard against this. Heracles' journey to Athens would likely encounter many twists and turns. Although they certainly couldn't stop this great hero, they could slow him down. Sure enough, as Heracles was about to reach the outskirts of Athens, a fierce wind suddenly arose in the sky. Notos, god of the south wind, who had been thoroughly tormented by Ares, reappeared in the clouds, blowing winds towards the ground and causing a huge downpour to fall in Heracles' path. The heavy rain made the ground extremely muddy and difficult to traverse, forcing Heracles to somewhat impatiently take shelter in a cave. Seeing this, Ares silently circled behind Notos, god of the south wind. He gestured behind this poor deity, who was still wearing shackles as he came out to blow the wind, found a suitable angle, and then suddenly kicked him down from the clouds. Ouch! Notos, god of the south wind, was caught off guard and tumbled directly from the cloud. He only managed to turn his head and see a familiar golden flash disappear from the cloud where he had just been. Afterward, amidst a dizzying haze, he directly fell onto the muddy ground. He rolled several times in the mud and water, not knowing where he had ended up. When he finally stopped, Notos, covered in mud, was astonished to find himself inside a cave, and in front of him, a burly man wearing lion hide armor and a lion head helmet was sitting with his arms wrapped around his knees, staring directly at him. Seeing the burly man, Notos was stunned, but the other party stood up directly, reaching for the huge bronze club leaning nearby. He hoisted this human weapon onto his shoulder, then circled around, blocking the cave's only exit, and calmly asked, "Was it you who blocked my path? Wind and rain, what do you mean by blocking your path?" Hearing the burly man's question, Notos, god of the south wind, recovered his senses and sneered. He tidied his clothes, used his divine power to wash off the mud on his body, and then said to the burly man with disdain, "Move aside, mortal, I am Notos, the god of wind, fulfilling the oracle of the higher gods. I advise you not to try and block a god's path, otherwise." Since Zeus took the lead in messing around in the mortal world, the gods on Olympus followed suit, and there were also many demigods in the Greek world. However, the strongest of these demigods could only rival the weakest of the minor gods, while the weaker ones, apart from being extraordinary in certain aspects, were otherwise like mortals, such as Linus, Apollo's son, who was casually killed by Heracles with a lyre. Notos inwardly believed that the burly man before him was merely an ordinary demigod and could never be a match for a powerful minor god like himself. However, after he issued his threats and warnings, Heracles merely lowered his head, looking at him with a seemingly dazed expression. "What? You don't understand human speech? Are you perhaps an idiot?" Notos walked aggressively in front of Heracles and forcefully pushed Heracles' chest. However, the latter remained motionless, his body not even swaying. Normally, upon seeing Heracles' overwhelming physical strength, most people would understand the disparity in their combat power and would not dare to provoke Heracles easily. However, Notos, considering himself a deity, was accustomed to arrogance and did not regard these demigods and mortals. Seeing Heracles motionless, he felt insulted and then angrily raised his eyebrows, cursing. "You audacious mortal! How dare you offend a god? Let me teach you a lesson." With that, Notos rolled up his sleeves and walked towards Heracles, who was blocking the cave entrance. A moment later, Notos, bruised and swollen again, had his hands and feet bound by Heracles with a leather rope. Heracles tied his hands and feet together, then threaded a wooden stick through the gap between his hands and feet, lifting him up and carrying him on his back. At this moment, Notos, god of the south wind, looked exactly like a slave. Mortal! You are desecrating a god. Even after being beaten by Heracles for a long time, Notos, god of the south wind, remained stubborn. With a thick tongue, he slurred his threats, "You will die a miserable death. I swear in the name of the father of the gods." Ah! Heracles casually slapped him and then stuffed a stone he picked up from the roadside into Notos's mouth, forcing him to shut up. Seeing this withered god, Heracles, who had been feeling depressed lately, couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. He patted Notos, god of the south wind's arm, and then said to him as Ares had instructed. "You said you came to block my path by divine decree. Then, in the name of my father, Zeus, I will seek an explanation from the gods. Athens is nearby, so why don't you come with me to Athena to judge who is right and who is wrong in this matter?" Chapter 149, Chapter 147 Athena, the best. As Heracles escorted Notos, rushing towards the Parthenon in Athens, Ares, on his end, also mobilized his alternate account, Perseus, to follow closely behind Sea King Poseidon, who had arrived in Athens in his avatar form. Although Poseidon had arrived in Athens, he did not immediately make a move. It seemed he himself had some reservations about his current situation. After all, he had previously sworn so confidently and powerfully before the gods on Olympus that he would never again set foot on Olympus, only to be discovered shortly after, using an avatar to wander around his niece's territory. This was something no one could justify. Of course, as one of the two great destroyers of the male god image on Olympus, Poseidon was certainly not one to care about face. According to the conclusions Perseus had drawn from tracking him these past few days, this fellow was merely scouting, evaluating risk versus reward. He had most likely received information, leaked intentionally by the three goddesses of fate and Athena, from who knows where, hearing that a priestess named Medusa in the Parthenon was very cute and adorable. Thus, he wanted to come and see if Medusa's cuteness and adorableness could make him cast aside his old face and go to any lengths to possess her. Upon realizing this situation, Ares also secretly informed Medusa of the matter. While tracking and monitoring Poseidon, he also instructed the girl to be careful and protect herself when going out, ensuring no one saw her appearance. Thanks to Ares, Medusa, when going out these past few days, in addition to her usual hooded robe, also added a black scarf. She used this scarf to cover her face, revealing only a pair of large eyes. And because these eyes were magic eyes, Medusa usually avoided eye contact when speaking to others, which further reduced the risk of her exposing her appearance. However, such methods were only temporary. To correct the twisted fate trajectory caused by Ares, Athena and the three goddesses of fate behind her would certainly find ways to expose Medusa's beauty to Poseidon. It was only a matter of time. Therefore, Ares also quickened his pace, waiting for Heracles to arrive in Athens with Notos, while simultaneously manipulating Perseus, striving to gain as much fame as possible within the city-state of Athens during this period. Therefore, he specifically switched to another alternate account to keep an eye on Poseidon, while his Perseus alternate account was busily participating in the comprehensive combat arena competition in Athens. When registering, Ares only filled in his name and the weapon he would use in combat. The competition system in Athens was also very simple. During the matches, each contestant would be randomly assigned a teammate to form a temporary team, engaging in 2-on-2 duels with other teams. They would progress from preliminaries and elimination rounds all the way to the semifinals. If a two-person team won in the semifinals, the final would be a one-on-one showdown between the two winners of that team, to determine who would be the dual king of the Athens arena competition. In arena combat, the poor in martial virtue Athenians naturally did not use real weapons, but rather training equipment specially made by the Athenians according to the methods bestowed by Athena, such as wooden swords wrapped in cloth, long staffs, etc. The arrowheads were also wrapped in a layer of gauze for cushioning. Moreover, most importantly, perhaps because the Athenians had been provoked by the Spartan warriors under Ares' command, they melted down all the excellent weapons previously given by the Spartans and remade them into weapons usable by normal people. However, the highest grade Spartan bronze pillar was uniquely preserved and erected next to the entrance of the Athens arena. Once someone won the arena competition, they could choose to challenge themselves to lift this bronze pillar and swing it in a circle. If someone succeeded, that person would be directly crowned the goddess warrior of Athens and would enter the Parthenon to receive a personal audience and blessing from the goddess. Ares's goal this time was to achieve this title of goddess warrior. Speaking of this title, he had casually mentioned it to Artemis in a conversation before, and Artemis had then inadvertently leaked it to Athena. While Ares's other alternate account was keeping an eye on the sneaky Poseidon, the comprehensive combat arena competition in Athens quickly began. After all, it was only the ancient city-state period, and Athens did not have such large-scale hosting capabilities, nor did the audience have such long patience. Therefore, even for such a grand event, all matches were completed within half a day. In this battle, Perseus, controlled by Ares, was naturally invincible. This physical body was originally of demigod hero specifications, and with a war god operating it, throwing him into this arena was simply crushing weaker opponents. So, half a day later, Perseus became the victor of the Athens Comprehensive Combat Arena competition, and incidentally, in front of all the spectators, he successfully used all his strength to lift the bronze pillar and spun it twice, earning cheers from the entire audience. The king of Athens immediately invited the priest of the Parthenon, asking him to inform the chief goddess Athena of this matter, and also had Perseus deliver a victory speech in front of the entire audience. Ares did not waste this opportunity. Led by the king of Athens, he came to the center of the arena and, with a strong voice, proclaimed to all the spectators: "Citizens of Athens, who have watched my battles and shared with me the joy and glory of victory, bathing in the goddess's radiance. I am Perseus, son of the great Zeus and Princess Danae, disciple of the wise Chiron and goddess Hecate, and heir to the kingdom of Argos." As he announced his name, the audience began to cheer his name. "Perseus! Perseus! Perseus!" Perseus raised his arm, and the entire crowd fell silent. Then, they heard him continue to proclaim loudly: "I was born in Sparta, a powerful nation that believes in the mighty war god Ares. However, I believe that while war god Ares is powerful, he is barbaric and tyrannical, only loving blood and war, not civilization and wisdom. This is unacceptable. So when I heard of goddess Athena, I traveled thousands of miles to come here, wanting to strive for glory and shine before the goddess, making my glory a tiny gem on the goddess's crown. Everyone, while Ares is good, he is far inferior to Athena. She is the perfect goddess, she is more beautiful than Aphrodite, more compassionate than heavenly queen Hera, more skilled in battle than war god Ares, wiser than Apollo, and more agile than Artemis. I, Perseus, swear here and now, she is my lifelong faith. Even if I die, even if I am nailed in a coffin, I will use my decaying vocal cords to shout Athena. She is the best." Most of the audience were citizens of Athens, and naturally, there were many loyal followers of Athena among them. Upon hearing Perseus's words, they all felt a deep connection and joined him in shouting loudly: "Athena! She is the best!" Chapter 150, Chapter 148 Athena's Rebellion. Inside the arena, Perseus's speech resonated with a large number of Athena's followers in Athens, and the king of Athens seized the opportunity to logically have the priest take Perseus to Parthenon for a baptism, hoping to tie this powerful demigod hero to Athens's war chariot. Ares was naturally pleased with this, because under the surveillance of his other alt account, Sea King Poseidon had already met Medusa, and it wouldn't be long before Medusa's appearance would be exposed right under his nose. To rescue Medusa, Perseus had to be in position quickly. Ares then checked Heracles' itinerary and found that this great hero, carrying notice, had already arrived outside the city-state of Athens and was heading towards Parthenon, so he relaxed, confidently beginning to dispatch Perseus to the designated location. At this moment, Athena, or the Fates indeed, began to cause trouble again, just as the veiled Medusa, wearing a hood, hurried past Poseidon's incarnation. A gust of wind suddenly arose from nowhere, lifting her veil. If you ask Ares why he knew this wind was their trick without anyone appearing, Medusa's veil was actually a scarf wrapped 3 times around the lower half of her face, and for such a wind to blow it up, it would be strange if there was nothing wrong with that wind. This scene also fell into Poseidon's eyes. Upon seeing Medusa, he paused slightly, but Medusa had already hastily pressed her veil back down, recovering her face. She looked at Poseidon with some fear, then turned and ran towards Athena's temple. Poseidon's incarnation watched Medusa's receding figure, then stroked his chin and chuckled. "Wow, perfect!" Then, he looked around, and finding no one paying attention, he also followed Medusa into Athena's temple. At this very moment, Ares also saw Heracles carrying Notus arrive at the plaza in front of Athena's temple, and he quickly had Perseus go to meet him. "Heracles!" Perseus waved as he approached Heracles, looking up at Heracles, who was a head taller than him, and asked, "Are you Heracles?" Heracles nodded, then carefully looked at Perseus and asked with some hesitation, "Are you Perseus?" "Yes, yes." Perseus laughed heartily and patted Heracles's arm. "It's truly nostalgic. Back when we were with teacher Chiron, I was always the one chasing you all to fight, and only you could fight with me then." "Indeed, it's quite nostalgic." Having finally met an old friend from childhood, Heracles, who had become taciturn since the death of his wife and children, couldn't help but show a slight smile. "When shall we spar again?" "I'm busy now, next time for sure." The two chatted casually for a few moments, then Perseus pretended to accidentally see Notos, god of the south wind, carried by Heracles. He walked over, patted the wind god's shoulder, and then asked, "Oh? Is this your slave? He looks quite sturdy, he should fetch a good price." "No." Heracles calmly stated something quite unbelievable for a normal human. "He claims to be Notos, god of the south wind. I don't know if it's true or false. He caused rain on my path, trying to stop me, and then I beat him up. I'm taking him to Athena's presence to confront him and see if he is indeed Notos, god of the south wind." "I see," Perseus said with a smile, seizing the opportunity. "That's perfect, I also need to go to the temple. I won the championship in a Goddess of Glory competition in this city-state and am going to the temple to receive a personal blessing from the goddess. The goddess has always favored heroes, and now you have accomplished such a feat, so why don't we go together?" All right." Heracles thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. So Perseus helped carry Notus, and the two heroes walked towards Parthenon one after another. Meanwhile, inside the temple, Athena, sensing through her statue, saw Medusa frantically hiding in her temple, and the old lecher Poseidon closely pursuing her, and her beautiful brows furrowed. She turned and looked at Kratos, who stood beside her, representing the future, and asked, "Can't it be somewhere else? Does it have to be in my temple that such a thing happens?" "No." Facing Athena's question, Kratos calmly replied, "Your temple is also a point that cannot be ignored above fate, so Poseidon must violate Medusa within Athena's temple." Seeing the displeased goddess of wisdom, she added, "Athena, to become the future god king, you must learn patience. As the goddess of wisdom, I believe you wouldn't be so foolish." "Of course, I know." Athena was extremely displeased. As a virgin goddess, especially after being targeted by Persephone, she had developed a severe aversion to such matters. Poseidon's actions made her feel utterly disgusted, but with Kratos watching, she was helpless. However, at this moment, Athena suddenly sensed that outside her temple, two demigods of Zeus's bloodline were approaching. She glanced in that direction, her gaze piercing through the thick walls of the temple, directly falling upon Heracles and Perseus, who were carrying Notos, god of the south wind, and hurrying towards her. "Heracles! Athena murmured, and that demigod hero, is it Perseus? Were they called here by Ares to protect Medusa? She secretly glanced at Kratos beside her, then looked down at Medusa, who had been cornered by Poseidon in the temple below, and a faint smile quietly curved at the corner of her lips. Ares, you've used me so many times, it's only fair that I use your people in return. Athena came up with a plan, so she pretended to be very unwilling and disgusted, closing her eyes and turning her head away. She even raised Aegis, using this shield to block her own sight while also blocking Kratos' sight, preventing her from interfering immediately. And after she had done all this, Heracles and Perseus also arrived at the temple entrance, carrying notice, and entered the magnificent Parthenon. Chapter 151, Chapter 149. Keep fighting. Don't stop. Who are you? Medusa hid behind the statue of Athena, looking terrified, and at the same time, somewhat disgusted, at the tall man slowly approaching her. This is Athena's temple, a sacred place protected by Athena. You scoundrel, I advise you not to act rashly. Ha 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 ha, a sacred place? My dear girl, do you know who I am? Poseidon laughed as he approached, saying. Not to mention in her temple, even if she came to me personally, she would have to give me some face. What's wrong with doing some pleasant things in her temple? Upon hearing this, Medusa immediately activated her demonic eyes. As magic power flowed, her pupils instantly turned red. The highest grade demonic eye, Cybele, instantly activated, transforming into a purple demonic light that shone directly upon Poseidon's avatar. Poseidon's avatar was instantly petrified by the demonic eye, turning into a stone statue with cracking sounds. But before Medusa could even sigh in relief, an endless divine aura suddenly surged from Poseidon's petrified avatar. Terrifying divine power instantly broke through Medusa's curse. Poseidon burst out of the petrification. He twisted his neck and then chuckled, "Oh, so Athena also has an interest in collecting goddesses to be her priestesses. That's wonderful." After speaking, Poseidon continued forward. He ignored the weapon Medusa swung at him and directly grabbed her arm. Due to the huge disparity in divinity and power, Medusa was unable to resist. She was held firmly by Poseidon's arm, struggling desperately but unable to move. "Little beauty, let me see you." Poseidon revealed a lewd smile and reached out to snatch away the scarf Medusa had wrapped around her face to conceal her features. When he saw Medusa's lovely face, his heart was immediately filled with endless possessiveness and desire for conquest. He licked his lips and chuckled softly, it seems this trip was truly not in vain. "Stop!" Medusa kicked him hard with her leg and shouted, "If you continue, I will call upon Athena." "Call her, call her!" Poseidon reached out and grabbed Medusa's clothes, tearing them forcefully. With a ripping sound, a large piece of cloth was torn off, revealing a large expanse of Medusa's fair skin. He sniffed Medusa's fragrance and shouted wildly, "Even if you scream until your throat breaks, no one will come to save you." However, what Poseidon didn't expect was that just as his words fell, two men's voices came from outside the temple. "By the way, Heracles, what if Athena says this fellow is really a god later?" one of them said. The other man, with a deeper voice, replied, "Even if he is a god, it doesn't matter. You and I are also Zeus's sons. We will discuss the matter as it stands. He was rude to me first, and I believe Athena will give me a fair and just judgment." As they spoke, the two men carried Notos, god of the south wind, like a pig into the temple. The crucial point was that Poseidon had always been incredibly arrogant and naturally wouldn't pay attention to these two demigod heroes, especially when he heard they were Zeus's children, which made him even more disdainful. Therefore, he didn't stop his hands and prepared to continue assaulting Medusa. Thus, the moment Heracles and Perseus entered the temple, they saw a lewd man forcefully pressing one of Athena's priestesses to the ground, preparing to commit an atrocity. Audacious madman! The moment he saw this scene, Perseus was enraged. He pulled out the magic staff Hecate had given him. With a flick of the staff, it instantly transformed into a long spear. He carried it and rushed towards Poseidon. Heracles, without a word, was even faster than Perseus. He directly threw down Notos, god of the south wind, put on the gauntlets made from the Nemean lion's claws, and his body moved like a hurricane behind Poseidon, delivering a full-force punch to Poseidon's back. Feeling the two men attacking him from behind, Sea King Poseidon merely covered the surface of his body with divine power and paid no mind. As one of the three great divine kings, he was accustomed to his unparalleled supremacy, always having only his two other brothers in his eyes, not even caring about other main gods. As for these two brats behind him, they were merely Zeus's bastards, how could they possibly harm him? Not only that, Poseidon also planned to take this opportunity to violate her priestess right in front of Heracles and Perseus, in their beloved Athena's temple, to vent the anger he had suffered from Zeus. But, when Heracles's fist landed on his back, Poseidon regretted it. This punch felt nothing like those weak demigod heroes, but rather like he was participating in a boxing match among the gods, and the opposing Ares or Apollo had viciously delivered a body blow to him. With a muffled crack, Poseidon's waist was forced to arch in a twisted posture. Medusa, who had been held motionless in front of him, even heard the sound of the divine king gasping in pain. However, what angered Poseidon was that this pain was not over. The power of the spear-wielding demigod who had charged in from the other side was only slightly weaker than that of Zeus's bastard who had punched him. But what was more troublesome than Heracles was that Perseus used divine weapons personally crafted by Hecate and Ares. Before attacking, he ruthlessly imbued the spear with a highly venomous magic attribute. Poseidon's super armor was broken by Heracles's heavy punch, leaving him in a severe stun in mid-air. Facing Perseus's fierce charge, there was no way to avoid it. Perseus immediately stabbed him in the waist with the spear. The terrifying spear blade directly pierced through his old waist, emerging from his lower back, bringing with it dripping blood. The potent venom on the spear blade instantly spread throughout Poseidon's body through the blade. Although it couldn't kill him, it was enough to make him wish he were dead. Ah! Poseidon, held aloft by Perseus's spear blade, screamed in pain, but the next second, he immediately faced a combo attack from Heracles. This future god of strength's immense power, even after his ascension to godhood, was unrivaled on Olympus. He directly raised his palm and slapped Poseidon's right cheek, instantly knocking out a row of Poseidon's teeth. Poseidon was filled with regret. He knew he had underestimated them and wanted to use his divine power to resist, but at that moment, Perseus didn't give him a chance to speak. Seeing Poseidon attempt to raise his hand, he immediately cast a spell, summoning several shadowy tentacles to bind Poseidon's movements. At the same time, he loudly shouted to Heracles, "Keep hitting! Don't stop! He dared to commit violence inside Athena's temple, he deserves to be beaten by us. Athena will surely be happy if we give him a good beating." Chapter 152, Chapter 150 Are you my summoner? After Perseus shouted those words, Heracles immediately cast aside his reservations. His attacks became even more ruthless, and soon Sea King Poseidon was so disoriented he didn't know which way was up. However, as the Sea King, Poseidon still had some tricks up his sleeve, at least he wouldn't be as embarrassing as Notos, god of the south wind. In fact, if he hadn't underestimated his opponents, Heracles and Perseus wouldn't have been able to beat him so badly. Just then, even in his dazed state, he accurately located the only water source within Athena's temple, the small fountain built in the central courtyard of Athena's temple. Having pinpointed the key to his comeback, Poseidon deliberately took a heavy punch from Heracles. Struck by the blow, he flew backward and landed right beside the fountain. Perseus noticed this and quickly shouted, "Stop him! He wants to get close to the water." Upon hearing this, Heracles's feet seemed to sprout wings, and he lunged towards Poseidon. However, even with the fastest speed in all of Greece, having just cracked the floor tiles from his furious sprint, he still couldn't match Poseidon's speed, who was already right beside the fountain. In the brief moment Heracles lunged at him, the Sea King had already reached his hand into the fountain's water. As he did so, he let out a wild laugh. "Didn't expect this, Zeus's son. You're still too green when it comes to scheming. This is my escape route." As he spoke, the Sea King's fingers plunged into the fountain's basin. Instantly, the water in the fountain transformed into pure water, caressing his entire body like a lover's hand. This water became his strength, healing his wounds, dispelling the potent poisons within him. Not only that, but the Sea King also used the fountain's water to pull out his golden trident, which symbolized his authority. A fierce wind blasted forth. The moment Sea King Poseidon drew his trident, Heracles was already before him. Zeus's son's enraged fist, encased in the Nemean lion gauntlet, shot directly towards Poseidon's face. As the fist moved, the air seemed to faintly hum with the sound of wind and thunder. But Poseidon was no longer overconfident. Facing Heracles's iron fist, he also raised his golden trident, gathered all his strength, and met the challenge head-on without hesitation. The gauntlet and the trident collided, instantly erupting in an ear-splitting boom. Visible blue divine power burst forth from Poseidon's body. Stimulated by this, Heracles, who had completely shed his mortal body with the help of Hera's milk, also unleashed a deep crimson lightning within himself that was in no way inferior to Poseidon's. As the divine powers of two major gods clashed, the entire plain where Athens was located began to shake. On the cliffs near the ocean, new underground water even burst forth in some places, like blades, splitting the cliffs into several sections. And all the residents within Athens simultaneously witnessed the divine might erupting from Athena's temple. They were panicked, believing it was the goddess's wrath, yet they didn't know why they had angered Athena. Fortunately, at that moment, priests who had received Athena's oracle arrived to calm their emotions. At the same time, a golden radiance symbolizing Athena spread out from within the temple, stabilizing the bedrock beneath Athens, which was shaking from the earthquake. Meanwhile, inside the temple, after blocking Heracles's attack, Poseidon rebuked him. "Shameless mortal, I am Sea King Poseidon. How dare you offend my divine might? Retreat at once." Sea King Poseidon. When Heracles heard this title, he suddenly paused for some reason. Then, feeling the force coming from the trident he was holding in a standoff, he couldn't help but mutter. "One of the three great god kings, and this is all you've got." Poseidon immediately became enraged and embarrassed. He forcefully pushed his trident, knocking Heracles away, and at the same time, he shouted, "Shameless mortal! I will let the sea crush your bones. Witness the power of the sea god. Don't listen to his nonsense. This is Athena's divine domain. He can't summon the sea here." No sooner had Poseidon finished speaking than Perseus, who was circling nearby, shouted. If he were truly so capable, he wouldn't have been driven down from Olympus by Zeus. "Mortal, you! You what, you? Why are you glaring at me? You scrub, can you even compare to our Athena?" Perseus was glared at threateningly by Poseidon, but he remained unafraid. He jumped up and down, cursing. "Someone driven into the ocean by Zeus, daring to act presumptuously within my Athena's divine domain? If I were you, I would have already committed suicide out of shame. I'm going to kill you." Provoked to fury by Perseus, Poseidon swung his trident and charged in his direction. Perseus exchanged a few blows with him but began to feel overwhelmed. If his physical body had been specialized in close combat like Heracles's, he might have been able to withstand it. But for the sake of the act, Ares had instead made Perseus learn magic and deliberately suppressed Perseus's close combat abilities, to prevent him from overshadowing Heracles in the future. Therefore, although he wasn't in mortal danger facing Poseidon, he still couldn't defeat Poseidon in a direct fight. However, smart friends know one thing: when a low-level character encounters an opponent they can't defeat, the simplest solution is to log into their main account to get revenge for the low-level one. So Perseus directly circled behind Heracles, shouting to him, "Help me hold him off. I'm going to cast a super spell and summon a powerful god. Let's all team up and beat this smelly idiot to death." Upon hearing this, Heracles immediately moved in, fiercely engaging Poseidon. Although Heracles couldn't defeat him at this moment, holding him off was more than enough. And although Poseidon desperately wanted to kill Perseus, he found himself in a dilemma. Heracles blocked his way forward, and when he tried to retreat, he discovered that the temple's main gate had been sealed by a golden divine energy barrier. Needless to say, this was certainly the work of a certain goddess of wisdom who had not yet appeared. Athena's divinity and divine power were similar to his, so even Poseidon couldn't instantly break through the barrier Athena had meticulously set up. While Poseidon lunged left and right but still couldn't break through Heracles' defense, Perseus, standing behind him, had already drawn the ritual magic circle on the ground and laid out the offerings and magical materials. After completing all of this, Perseus let out a wild laugh at Poseidon. He stood before the ritual array, striking a particularly strange pose. He raised his right arm, clenched into a fist, and held it across his chest, shouting loudly, "The swinging spear shall cleave the sea, bringing suffering, destruction, and death to the world. Turn my offerings into ritual flames, descend from the sky. Conqueror of the sea. Great foe of Poseidon." Accompanied by Perseus's powerful and righteous-sounding incantation, a massive burst of fire suddenly erupted from the ritual array drawn on the temple floor. Simultaneously, a deep crimson comet streaked across the sky above the temple, and a flaming spear landed precisely in the center of the array. Then, with a burst of wild laughter, a towering figure descended from the sky, directly smashing through the roof of Parthenon, shattering Athena's statue, and crashing into Athena's temple. The flames were parted by the spear, and Ares, wearing a billowing red cloak, appeared within the temple, asking his sub-account nearby, "Are you, then, my summoner?" Chapter 153, Chapter 151 Athena, "You bastard, how dare you plot against me?" To distance himself from his main account, Perseus did not use a summoning ritual specifically targeting a certain god. Instead, he used a ritual magic newly developed by Hecate, designed to summon an opposing or hostile god to another. Many gods were against Poseidon, but any god daring to oppose Poseidon would at least be a chief god. Of course, Perseus knew before using this magic that it was essentially a one-way summoning magic targeting himself. This was because Zeus and Hades, the two brothers, would not respond to this magic, and chief gods like Demeter and Athena would not directly confront Poseidon. After much deliberation, the only one with reason and ability to answer the call was Ares himself. Firstly, in the previous war against the Atlanteans, his Spartans had taken payment to help Athena's people severely punish Poseidon's army. Secondly, this was Athena's temple, and the animosity between Ares and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, had lasted for countless years. The entire Greek world, from Zeus to wild animals on the roadside, probably knew that Ares and Athena disliked each other. Therefore, when Perseus summoned Poseidon's great enemy in Athena's temple, only Ares, the god of war, responded to the call. However, after Ares symbolically asked this question to his alternate account, Perseus did not respond. Instead, he suddenly let out a heart-wrenching scream. "Athena!" He lunged at Ares, who deftly stepped aside, allowing Perseus to pick up what he had just trampled underfoot, the head of Athena's statue. When Ares descended from the sky, he had deliberately aimed here, shattering Athena's statue. "Humph, it's just a statue, isn't it?" Seeing Perseus's actions, Ares's face showed disdain. Yet, at the same time, he manipulated his alternate account, Perseus, making Perseus's face show an expression of immense heartache and furious anger. Hearing Ares's own words, Perseus angrily said, "How could you do this? Even if you and the goddess are rivals, you are still siblings by blood. How could you destroy her statue? Oh, I destroyed her statue? Didn't you summon me, you brat? Ares also roared. Damn it, can't you be reasonable? Sure enough, Athena and her lackeys are all the same dogs. I was such a fool to respond to your summons. If I had known you were Athena's lapdog, I would never have come here, damn it. While Ares and Perseus were arguing, Heracles quickly separated from Poseidon and advised. Ares, Perseus, stop arguing. Focus on the enemy in front of you. Oh! Ares and Perseus immediately stopped their quarrel. To be honest, arguing with oneself felt incredibly strange, but Ares feared he would go insane if he continued, so he quickly ceased. Perseus carefully retreated to the side, clutching the only remaining intact part of Athena's statue. Ares, meanwhile, looked at Poseidon, who appeared to be struggling under Heracles' entanglement, and smiled at him. Oh, isn't this the invincible second uncle? How did you get beaten by two mortals? Ares. Poseidon roared, if you have any dignity as a chief god of Olympus left, then come and help me. Kill these audacious mortals. Let them know the might of the gods. Oh, who was it that said he had broken ties with Olympus earlier? Why are you now calling yourself a chief god of Olympus? Ares looked at Poseidon's face, which was alternating between green and red, and mockingly said. And you've misunderstood, second uncle. The reason I responded to that kid's summons behind me isn't because I want to uphold any chief god's authority. My purpose in coming here is very simple, I just want to kill you, second uncle, or be killed by you. As he spoke, Ares had already pulled out the spear from the ground. Flames encircled his sides, and the god of war raised his beast-faced shield, assuming the standard Spartan charge stance. Seeing Ares's actions, Poseidon also panicked a little. As a god-king, he wouldn't necessarily be taken down by a Heracles who hadn't fully matured in a direct confrontation, but with Ares added into the mix, he couldn't resist at all. Moreover, this was Athena's temple, the divine domain of the goddess of wisdom, not his ocean. In the ocean, he might have the confidence to face two chief god-level enemies, but doing so in a place like this would only lead to a severe beating. So Poseidon turned and ran. He was already prepared to take heavy injuries and forcibly break through the blockade Athena had set at the temple entrance. Once he could reach his ocean, he would reconsider. Heracles and Ares certainly wouldn't let him get his way. They quickly caught up to Poseidon, and Ares shouted as he chased. Poseidon! If your current state were recorded and presented to Zeus on Olympus, he would surely reward me. Was Zeus also involved in this matter? Poseidon no longer had time to ponder. He fled with all his might towards the temple entrance, but just as he endured two punches from Heracles and a sinister, precisely aimed fiery thrust from Ares at his vital spot, and reached the entrance of Athena's temple, the figure of the blonde goddess appeared before him. This goddess, who had been hiding ever since he had acted against Medusa, finally appeared outside the temple. She stood at the door, fully armed with helmet, divine shield, and weapon, smiling as she looked at him. When Poseidon saw the knowing smile on Athena's face, he clearly misunderstood something. Past memories flashed through his mind, the rumors of beautiful Athenian maiden priestesses circulating from the Golden Palace in the sea, Medusa deliberately luring him into Athena's temple, then the two heroes Heracles and Perseus, and finally Ares, the god of war, descending from the sky. All of this culminated in the smiling face of the beautiful goddess before him. So, with a look of sorrow and anger, he roared at Athena. Athena! You scoundrel! How dare you scheme against me? Chapter 154, Chapter 152 Blame each other to show respect. Hearing Poseidon's roar, Athena's smile froze, and she tilted her head in surprise. It seemed Poseidon had misunderstood something, but it didn't matter. His hatred, no matter who it was ultimately directed at, had no impact on her plan. Because of Ares's meddling, Athena had grown accustomed to taking the blame over the years. Moreover, when Athena was secretly disrupting the plan of the Fates, she basically always blamed Ares, the rebel. They blamed each other, acted as tanks for each other, and attracted some of the enemy's hatred for each other. It was a fair exchange, each relying on their own abilities. So Athena simply ignored Poseidon's impotent rage. When the Sea King used all his might to break through the divine power barrier she had set at the entrance and lunged at her from inside the temple, Athena agilely turned, blocked Poseidon's trident with her shield, then spun around, used her spear as a staff, pressed it against his neck, and then hooked his leg, directly bringing Poseidon to the ground. As the king of the seas, Poseidon couldn't just sit there and wait for death. As Athena completed this series of actions, pinning his injured body to the ground, Poseidon immediately prepared to use the power of earthquakes to counterattack Athena. However, at that moment, the corner of his eye caught sight of the goddess standing behind Athena. The noble phantasm against Olympus gods, the hearth goddess Hestia. This great goddess, who had once been pursued by both Poseidon and Apollo, and could be considered the dream lover of most male gods on Olympus, was now standing behind Athena, frowning, and looking at Poseidon with a very angry and disappointed gaze. "Poseidon, my dear brother," she said to the king of the seas, who was pinned to the ground by Athena. "I didn't expect you to do something so shameless. That innocent little girl is not only a poor victim, she is also Athena's priestess, and you are Athena's second uncle. You and Zeus often talk about the importance of identity and status, so why have you forgotten this identity of yours now? Look at you, you don't look like a god king at all. You look like a thief who was caught by the owner after stealing something. How embarrassing!" When Poseidon saw the woman he had pursued for many years standing in front of him, looking at him with such disappointment, the blow to him was even more severe than Heracles punching him in the chest 100 times. The divine power swelling within his body slowly dissipated, and his hand, which had been clutching the sand on the ground, gradually relaxed. Poseidon slowly turned his head, lying on the ground as if resigned to his fate, not daring to meet Hestia's gaze again. What's more, counting the hearth goddess, there were already 4 main gods present, plus the demigod hero Perseus, whose strength was slightly inferior but who knew many strange and powerful spells and was not weak in martial arts. If it really came to a fight, Poseidon was not their opponent. Seeing Poseidon's surrender, Hestia sighed deeply, then she said to Poseidon, "It's a good thing Athena came to inform me in time, so you didn't cause a great disaster, Poseidon. Apologize to Athena, and then go back. Regarding your matter with Zeus, I will go to Olympus later and have a good talk with Zeus." After Hestia finished speaking, Athena also cooperatively released her hold on Poseidon. The Sea King got up from the sand without a word, glared at Athena, and then, without apologizing, silently walked to the cliff of Athens, leaped, and jumped into the ocean, disappearing from sight. Alas! Hestia watched Poseidon's figure disappear from view and couldn't help but let out a long sigh, but strangely, as she sighed, another person beside her also sighed in sync with her. Hestia turned her head in surprise, only to see her great-nephew Ares, who had arrived beside her at some point, looking at the cliff where Poseidon had jumped into the sea, sighing at the vast ocean. "Alas, what a pity, why couldn't he be killed? It's all your fault, Athena, why did you let go? Coward! Ares!" Hestia helplessly covered her forehead, then looked at Athena, who was looking at her innocently, and then sternly admonished. "You two, stop arguing with your sister. Although she snatched your divine office, it was Zeus who gave the order, wasn't it? As a family, you should live in harmony, so that our Olympus gods' rule can continue." "Oh, so Hestia, you mean this matter is ultimately Zeus's fault?" Ares pretended to be naive and nodded seriously. "Understood, let's go, Athena, we'll reconcile now and then go confront Zeus." Athena turned her head, not wanting to bother with Ares. She bowed to Hestia and said, "Hestia, I'll go back first." Athens is in chaos and needs my comfort. Hestia nodded to Athena, then softly said, "Let that frightened priestess child rest well. Also, those 2 children in the temple who helped her are extraordinary heroes, Athena. This time, you must reward them well. If it weren't for them, who knows what absurd things Poseidon would have done." "I know." Athena bowed slightly to Hestia, showing her respect, and the hearth goddess turned her head to look at Ares and said to him, "Ares, I've heard from Athena about what happened between Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus before. The biggest mistake in this matter is still with Zeus. I'm going to Olympus to see him, would you be willing to come with me and see me off?" "Of course, I'd be delighted, Hestia." Facing this noble and morally exemplary elder sister among the Greek gods, Ares no longer acted like his usual defiant self. Instead, he uncharacteristically showed some humility. He also bowed slightly to Hestia, then summoned his chariot from the sky and invited the hearth goddess to board. Hestia politely thanked her nephew, then gracefully sat in the back seat of the chariot, maintaining a not too far, not too close distance from Ares. Ares, at this point, also proactively took on the role of charioteer. He drove the chariot, carrying Hestia towards Olympus. It wasn't until the chariot's light disappeared from sight that Athena turned around to look at her half-collapsed temple. At this moment, the somewhat annoyed voice of the goddess of fate, Kratos, echoed in her mind. "Athena, can't you even handle something like this? What are you saying, respected Kratos, can you blame me for this?" Athena blinked innocently and replied, "It's not that Athena didn't try, but Ares is too cunning. 3 goddesses, I swear, besides me, you won't find anyone else, whether in heaven or on earth, who can contend with Ares. So, it's all Ares's fault, right? New chapter is coming soon. Write a review."